right. See? Yeah. So again, thank you very much for joining us for this workshop. As we said earlier, this is, hopefully you know by now, it's part of a series of workshops that we're going to hold, and we'll talk about them. For the ones that we haven't met before, my name is Mohanad. I work with BIMes for the last, I think, 5 years now. Let's start. Just a brief introduction about us. BIM Engineering Solutions is actually just a company dedicated to BIM. So everything we do is BIM related. We operate through 3 main offices. So one is here, the one that most of you here deal with. And we have 2 offices in Egypt, and then we have partners in Saudi, Kuwait, and Bahrain. We deal with software, which is, for example, we're distributors of ARCHICAD and other BIM software. We do training, implementations, and we also do services. So services, actually, we do BIM services to developers, contractors, and so on. We've been in this market for the last 10 years, yet the individuals have more experience. I have around, I think I started with BIM in 2000. So individuals, we have more experience. The reason actually I mentioned this part with the services is the next slide, but just to show you that actually we deal with different stuff. So it's not just the software. We don't just sell software, we actually provide all the services. And that's why if you look at some of the selected clients, you'll find a variety from government entities, developers, contractors, designers, and all, because we do with all these different parts. The reason I mentioned the services actually, and these are some of the projects that we have done either for contractors or for the developers. You might recognize some of them. Some of you were part of the team doing it. So some of them are actually in Kuwait, Saudi, Egypt, here in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The reason actually I mentioned that is I'd like to always emphasize the fact that we actually know the product inside out. Like, we work on these projects, so we're not just software salespeople that just trying to push boxes. Actually, we do know the software. We work with it daily on quite challenging, large projects. These are few examples of projects that you might recognize. These are all done ARCHICAD, architecture, structure, MEP, the whole thing, and those are a bit challenging projects usually for BIM in terms of sizes. But we were able to run those on single files in ARCHICAD, and those are few versions ago. And you can see that actually that's one of the things about ARCHICAD. Actually, the selection of it in our services is actually the fact that we can handle such large projects with relatively ease. Actually, you might be familiar with those because they were published earlier. But you can see this is one of the buildings, let's say, and has, I think, 92 floors of MEP, and that's all running within ARCHICAD. So it's not even a viewer. I mean. One thing before I start actually with talking about the workshop, I just wanted to highlight 2 points. For our clients that are here or watching us on the online streaming, ARCHICAD 22 is out already. We've sent emails for the clients of SSA that are eligible for free upgrades. But we just found out that apparently some didn't get the emails or something. So I just want to emphasize, if you are a client and you are an SSA, ARCHICAD 22 is already out. Check your emails. If you couldn't find it, contact us. We'll give you the links to upgrade your licenses, to install the latest version and all. The other part, for the ones that haven't used ARCHICAD, not familiar with ARCHICAD, but they want to give it a try, you can head to myarchicad.com, and that is basically where you can get a trial version for 30 days. If you are a professional, if you're a student, you can get it obviously for free as long as you're studying. About this workshop, as you know, we started this idea that actually we want to hold a series of workshops where we help our clients and users in general to be to get more out of ARCHICAD, to use it properly on different levels. This is a new concept to us, and that's why even the venue we try to select sort of a cozy place, because that's why we're planning to hold all the next events. And we're also streaming this online, as we will discuss in a second. So if anything goes wrong, again, forgive us on this time, but we promise you'll get it better the next time. What we did actually for this workshop, we sent an email, actually a survey to online, and we asked people about their favorite time, and these were the results. So overwhelmingly, actually, it was around 70% that they selected Saturday, either morning or evening. So that's why we went with Saturday. I know it might be not exactly convenient to everyone, but that is the majority that people preferred Saturday. So that's why we're doing it Saturday. And we found that actually we have also a good demand on the online presence. So that's why we're going through the trouble of going online at the same time. And again, we decided to go with English because everyone was fine with English, basically. The workshops, the planned workshops that we're going to hold actually are these 7 workshops. The one today is about ARCHICAD 22 new features that we will go through today. We will have a workshop about advanced modeling in ARCHICAD. So that workshop will be focused on things that you do while you're modeling, maybe tips and tricks, maybe tools that you're not very, that we don't think that everyone is utilizing properly, like, I don't know, morphs or shell tools. We will talk about how to handle maybe larger models to be sure that the model is still usable, how you can control that. We'll talk about some maybe of the tools, importing objects from other formats and using them and so on. And we'll have another workshop about presentation, and that will concern everything actually in presentation. So in terms of preparing your drawings, I know I want plans with shadows, with rendered, so we will cover that. We will cover also renderings within ARCHICAD, so cine render, a few tips that can give you a good results. We will cover also BIMx, which we think is a superior presentation tool, and we'd like all our clients, because it's out of the box, it's coming, with no extra cost. It's you have it already. We want you to use that, so we'll also introduce that as hopefully we can get it as part of your standard workflow. And also in this workshop, we will introduce another software for the one that some are already using it. It's called Twinmotion, which is also a superior tool that you can prepare your very realistic renderings, animations, VR in matter of seconds, and it integrates with ARCHICAD beautifully. So we'll cover that also. The fourth planned one is about documentation. So we will focus on in that actually about how do you prepare your documents, the views, the sheets, the pen assignments, even translators. What is the best thing when you're exporting to specific formats, DWGs, to PDFs, how you deal with them, how you archive those in your file, publish, and all of that. So everything related actually to documentation, automatic dimensioning, all of that. We'll try to give you, an overview around all of those. Another workshop, planned workshop, is the BIM coordination and coordination in general with other platforms. So basically, we would focus in that workshop about working with others using different software. So regardless, actually, it's mainly focusing on others using BIM software. So you might be collaborating with engineers or architects or contractors that's using another BIM software. They might be using Revit or Tekla or Ecosim from Bentley or any other package. We will see how we can actually collaborate with them. How can we work with them? How can we keep track of changes even when we're exchanging models? How we can compare the models to their models? What kind of information do we want to export and exchange, translators, and so on? And also, we'll introduce in this, mostly in this workshop, also another software, Solibri Model Checker, that will give you a powerful tool actually to check the quality of your models. And so you can use it with ARCHICAD. So if you just want to run it through, you just want to check the quality of your modeling, you want to check against rules, design rules, that corridors are not less than so and so, or whatever you can think of. But also it is very powerful if you want to coordinate different models coming from different sources. So we'll introduce that there. And then the last one is actually dedicated to scheduling. And by the way, this is the order is by the votes, so that's when people voted whatever they're interested in. Scheduling is more about creating customized schedules. What can we get out of it? How we can transfer it to maybe spreadsheets, how we can import it back, how we can link it to overrides, graphical overrides, and so on. And then we will have a workshop to help the clients that are interested in building their own templates. What kind of things you should consider to include in your template and how we can do it. About today's workshop, you're familiar with it already, I guess. We have two main parts. The first one that we are going to do now is actually covering the new features that we'll talk about, which is mainly curtain wall, the parametric profiles, and the new concept of expressions, and then the new enhancements in Grasshopper, BIMx, and BIMcloud. We will have a break. We'll go to lunch here in the same building. And then when we come back, we will actually extend on these features. So we'll go into examples, more of actually how you can do that. So the first part is just introduce these features. The second part is actually how does it work. Obviously, if you cannot make it for both, still one is good. But I think it is beneficial if you can actually attend both parts, because to be able to go back to office and actually use it, I think you need the second part. We'll play a short clip about the new features of the new feature, mainly the enhancement in curtain wall of ARCHICAD 22, and then we will start actually the presentation. So the first feature that was, I think, the theme of this clip is the enhancement of the curtain wall tool. This image used to be, and I think it's still a good representation of the concept of BIM, which actually the idea that you have, a central model and you get your drawings as a delivery. So it's mainly focusing on the BIM deliverables. In this version of ARCHICAD, mainly we tried to focus on other part, which is the actual design workflow. Looking at some of the, let's say, architecture record editions of last year, we noticed that mainly now the design trend is about the facade treatment. So for years there was maybe a work on these flexible bulby architecture. We noticed that this is more the new trend. And if you break down the facade treatment or facades in general elevations, we find that actually no matter how complicated it looks like, so even something like this optical illusion, you can break it down to a pattern. So it's usually a pattern being repeated. And that was part of the core actually of the enhancement that we had in this tool. And when you look at a design process of a facade design, let's say a facade design process, we found that, for example, for ARCHICAD 22 up to ARCHICAD 22, it was a good tool when you knew what you're looking for. So when you have the design sort of sketched out, you can start customizing that curtain wall and get it and do part of the documentation. In this version, we tried to also extend the usability of that. So even when we reached that point and we did that, we wanted to be able that with all the customization that we applied, we can still change the design. So we don't have to reapply these customization. So we tried to implement these features as embedded part of the curtain wall as much as possible. So we avoid having customization as much as possible. Also, we try to extend it throughout the process that actually you can experiment while you're working with the curtain wall. You can experiment different patterns. You can experiment different elements, and that will not cost you, like you don't have to redraw. And also, we empowered the parts about documentation, and hopefully you can create that directly, all the kind of documentation that you want out of it. I will switch now actually to ARCHICAD, and maybe we can go through these features together. I'll start with I think you've seen this already. This is the Freiburg University library, and it's being used as the iconic building for this version. And you see, it's not uncommon that actually you start with something like these surfaces when you're designing, you're not sure yet of it, and so on. But with ARCHICAD 21, so far, what we were able to do without customization, so out of the box, is something like this, which could be good to some extent, but with some buildings, we still needed a lot of customization. So for example, this, because it had different slanting surfaces or so on, you can see, for example, there is no alignment between these rows because the distance is different in each one. So we needed to do calculations, we needed to do customizations, and so on. Let's see some of the differences or the enhancement that we did in 22. So for example, if I go to the dialog box, the settings of this curtain wall, we can recognize that actually the scheme pattern first, it's the editor part, the grid pattern and preview is redesigned. It's actually more, it looks more like the one from the railing tool, maybe that you recognize now. And we can do way more than actually what we used to do. So we'll just show some parts. So for example, one of the things, what we had earlier was always that we had to know the sizes. So you had to know the sizes to be able, but for example, in this case, I can just go with, number, and I want, let's say I know 7 rows. Let's say that's one thing. And also I wanted patterns. So the pattern I wanted actually solid and spandrel, or solid and glass, sorry, to be sort of overlapped. So let's see how we can also do that. So for that, I'll start maybe by making these a little bit smaller, and then maybe add another 2. And let's say here we want to change these. Let's say we want to change these panels here. So let's say we change this to glass. And then we can work even on the frame. So let's say this is a frame that I don't want to exist. So I can delete this frame. This frame is deleted, and maybe this and this. Yeah. And then maybe also these frames here, I can select them all, and then change them, let's say, to another type. So I'll just change them to transom, and then maybe these frames here. Let's say I'll delete these frames. So let's say we have this shape here. Sorry, let's just delete those. So delete those totally. Okay, so let's say we did this small change. Let's click OK, and now it'll update the curtain wall, and we will get the result that if we wanted to do that in 21, it will require a lot of customization. Just give it a second. And here you go. You can see now, for example, the alignment of them, this overlapping part, which again, in 21 earlier, we wouldn't be able to do it unless we do a bit of customizations. To go into this more a bit about these parts or these components or parts of the new tool, that's another building we can look at here. And then let's go to the editing part. Yeah, again, you can see here that things are actually a bit flexible. So let's say if I want to select these panels here and introduce a diagonal frame. And let's say here also, so go this. And let's say I'll select these frames here, these 6 frames, and then delete, and maybe also these frames here and delete them. Yeah, and then so based on this, when I click OK, it will rearrange itself into this hexagonal pattern. And this is not, I mean, these are actually panels that are in this shape. So I can select each panel, I can change the type. We can see later on, we can pick windows or so on and so forth. Yeah. So these are actual elements that we can work on. Another quick example also to show some of the enhancements. Let's say in this curtain wall, if I go to settings, what we had earlier, if you remember, we had only 2 types when we were creating the pattern or we were designing the pattern. We only had two types of panels. Let's say they're either the distinct or the main panels. That is not a limitation anymore in ARCHICAD 22 because we can apply any number of panels or frame types or so on. So for example here, let's say we want to introduce a panel that is a window. So I can basically go to panels, and here I will have, you know, the distinct and main, they're still here, but I can start adding types that I want to use. And, you know, I can create new one, or I can pick one from the favorites. So in this case, I will go with a curtain wall window. So I have now a curtain wall window introduced in the pattern. So when I'm working on the scheme here, I can say, well, you know, I want these maybe, I don't know, let's say these to be windows. And then if I click OK, again, it will update, and they're all windows that, and you know, we could do that in the earlier versions, but that will be a customization that will require, you know, a lot of work. And all of these, you know, are functioning windows. So if I want to change anything, I don't know, if I want to try opening this window, if it allows me, you know, we can open the windows or anything, because all of these are actually dynamic elements. Another thing to show in this example maybe is, let's say these, the white cross frames, let's say they're actually reflecting structural elements. So they're reflecting something for the earthquake studies and so on. And I want it to be emphasized in the elevations. So basically what I can do is I can again go back to settings, and in the frames, I can select these frames. And again, even with frames now, we're not limited to a specific number. If you remember in the earlier ones, we had, I think, the boundary, transoms, and the mullions. We can add any number. So for example, here, we had these as, we call them the diagonal frames. And I can start increasing, and maybe you can see it here. I don't know if it's clear, actually. Yeah, so it's okay, it's clear, this part. Like, for example, if I start increasing the priority, so I can see the result here that now it has a higher priority, and then when I click OK, that will also be reflected in the model. So, you know, we'll have a very clear intersections. That allows us to do a lot of variations of this. So for example, this elevation is actually just frames. So these are just different frame types. So if I go now to settings, just to show you, these are just different frames that you can see, I hope, with the green line when they're highlighted. And we can get something like this just out of frames. It's not something that we need to customize. Or we can have a facade which just basically panels. So this has no frames. It contains no frames. It's just panels. So you can see. And that's an important thing to note, that panels now are not necessarily rectangular. Yeah. So as I showed earlier. You know, that is good. But what if we still want a little bit more of a free pattern? We wanted to sketch something and work on it. And that's where the pattern editor comes in. So let's say we have this. It's a sketch for some shading device that I'm going to use. And I want it to be in my curtain wall. So this is an elevation. This is a curtain wall, an empty one. So it's just an empty space, but it's curtain wall already. And let's say if I open the, and I start editing it, yeah? So I want to edit this curtain wall. So basically I can pick the frame tool here. and start tracing over, whatever I have here as an image. Yeah, so I can start applying frames. Obviously, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but just to show you the concept. So I'll cancel this, and I'll show you after we have applied the frames. So now we have the frames. I can turn off the trace reference, so you can see we have applied the frames. That's good, but then I have different parts, and I want this to be repeated maybe, or later, or I change it or something. I don't have to copy or anything. That's where the pattern comes in. So we have a new part, which is the pattern. Once I click it here, you can see this red box. And I can start adjusting the pattern, let's say edges in this case. So let's say I want it to be up to here. And now you can, I think, see when I'm adjusting it, it gives me an instant feedback of the results that I'm going to get with this pattern. And that works in elevations, it works in 2D, it works in 3D, and so on. So when I hit apply, it will apply this pattern to the whole curtain wall in this case. Yeah. So let's say now it is all over the curtain wall, but it's still not much of a shading device because it's all solid. So let's say we want to adjust parts of it. I want to delete some parts, so I can select the panels that I want to delete. So let's say I want to delete this, and this. So I can just delete them, and you can see this is actually a full panel. So I delete those panels, and it will get again updated, and I will have the shape that I was looking for. And let's look at this actually in 3D. So we look at this, for example, applied to the building that we have it there and all. But let's say after I applied it, I noticed that, for example, maybe it is large or small. I want to rescale it. So how can I do that? And the other thing is, let's say as a pattern, I want it to be aligned at the edges. And obviously, I can still drag like what we used to do. But let's see if we can do it better. So let's go to the settings of that. First thing is the size. So let's say instead of 10 meters, I want it to be 7 meters. So scaling it down is just basically scaling these boxes. And we have an option now called best division. So best division actually, it tries to fit like an integer number of the patterns around the shape that we draw. So let's see how that works. So we go with best division for both, and clicking OK. It will scale it down. It will wrap it around the, whatever shape that we have created. So you can see now it's smaller. It wraps around it, and so on. Obviously, even with the previous tool that we had, the curtain wall, it wasn't just for curtain walls. We used it for so many things. And with such freedom, I think you can also consider using this tool for so many uses. I'll just maybe show some. And again, remember, actually, what I'm showing now is more of just a demo. After the break, we will look into more examples in depth. Yeah. So, I mean, I know you'll have a lot of questions. We'll try to cover. We will have now actually. We will stop for questions, but I mean, the majority of things I think will be answered when we go through the second session. So anyways, this is, for example, a stone cladding facade, but as you can see, it's actually, it's a curtain wall. And I can show you maybe the pattern, let's say, again, the concept of pattern. You can see this is the pattern. And again, regardless if I'm working in 2D, 3D, whenever I adjust the pattern, I can get the feedback. I can, work around based on this, feedback that I'm working on. That is another example that is just frames. So you can have frames, and the frame is not necessarily flat or has this shape. We can have any shape, and we will cover that. So yeah, you can really do a lot of uses, or you can utilize it for so many things in your designs. One other enhancement actually for the curtain wall tool is the corner frames. Earlier, we had, I believe, one type of corner frames, which was this. We have quite a few types that could be helpful, I think, for whatever we're doing. So, for example, we have this block type, which is block frame, and this adjusts itself with the, with the angle that we were working on. So it knows the angle, it adjusts the angle. Another example may be with the this type that actually allows us to apply a corner panel. So if I go to this here, you can see if I go to the settings of this frame. So for example, I can customize the frame types, and you can see it. I'm not sure if it's big enough. Let's see. Yeah, you can see it here. I can adjust the panel that we have. What is the type of it? What is the shape of it? The size of it. So I'll make it, I don't know, 800. And based on this, I'll have that shape. And again, this is, I mean, it will adjust itself to the angle when we're working on it. Yeah, so it adjusts itself to the angle of whatever we're working on. Also, an enhancement happened in the parts where it's related to actually presenting these curtain walls in 3D and 2D. So that's a curtain wall with so many elements. Maybe it has frames, panels, you know, sun shading devices, and so on. But we can always go to a simplified version of it, and we can still recognize the doors, the openings, and so on, but it's more simplified. So maybe if we want to show a schematic level, even if we are at the end, we can switch back to that. And also we can, in 2D, we can change a lot in the way that we represent the drawing. So maybe maybe this is while we're working on design, maybe at a scale it's fine, but let's say we want to present it for submission and have more information in it, so we can start seeing where the frames are located, where the overhead elements and so on. Or we can actually go quite detailed where it actually will reflect the frame designs and the elements, or we can use also a combination where we have, you know, maybe I don't want all the details from the head elements, the overhead elements, but I still want to see the frames and so on. And we can have that. And there's a lot of combinations that we can actually do in 2D and 3D to have that represented to hopefully the level that you want directly from the model. Also, a new enhancement that we can now use Profile Manager to apply profiles. Who's not familiar with Profile Manager here? It's okay, raise your hand. No. Okay. Okay, that's actually good. You know Profile Manager, that's great. So basically, in Profile Manager, which is a tool, you know, in ARCHICAD to draw any profile of anything, whether it's a wall, it's a beam, it's a column, well, not anything. Okay, let's be specific. Now it's extended to actually that we can use it with these objects. So these frames, for example, this frame here is actually, if I go to settings, it's actually a profile frame that's coming from the Profile Manager. So we can maybe check it in Profile Manager if you want. So in Profile Manager, basically, I can't remember the name, to be honest, but I think that's one. And it's created in Profile Manager, so we can assign it now back to the frames. So I think it's good. So you can even go to, you know, one-to-one. I don't know why would you go to one-to-one, but basically you can do that now. Another system, or another actually new type of panels that is introduced that allows us now to use the unitized system. I wasn't, to be honest, familiar with the system. I know about it, but I don't know how it works. But now I understand it. So if you're not familiar with it, I'll try to explain it also. Basically, the unitized system, from my understanding, does not contain frames and panels. Actually, the panel comes with, let's say, half frame, and then it connects to another half frame from the second panel, and so on. And now, actually, we can do that within ARCHICAD in exactly the same way. So if I cut this here, and let's look at it here. So let's say here, if I go to edit, and let's assume I'll delete this, you see that actually this frame or half frame is still part of this panel. And that is a new type of panels that allows me, actually, this is called the profile edge, that allows me to assign a profile that is also created in the Profile Manager. So I can draw that, I assign it back to the pattern or to the, you know, to the panel, and it'll be just part of the panel. And these panels also, they come with an option where you can put a sticker, maybe just like the stickers behind you. It could be any shape. So let's say I'll place a bird. That's a weird thing to place, I know, but it's a bird. But basically, you're not limited to that. You can create, again, in Profile Manager, any shape and assign it to it. So for example, it could be if you want to include a branding, like what we always do, plugs for our brands everywhere. So that's a Graphisoft, but those are actually parts of the panels. They're not, you know, a texture or something. So you can quantify it, you can detail it, or whatever you want with it later. One more thing maybe to show is we talked about this example I think earlier, but let's say I'll go to this to edit. And now with this shape, we also introduced a new type of panels where we can actually apply windows to any shape, basically. So if I go to this panel here, and I get the polygonal window, and you know, we have the same controls, opens outside, where's the, is it side hung, is it top hung? Let's say it's top, so it opens from top. And that is, again, a window that, you know, it's still what we call it, an openable window, or whatever action that we have from the direction. And it's not limited to one shape. So let's say if I add, let's say using the frame tool, I will add a frame, say, okay, let's say here, and another frame, let's say here, and say, no, that didn't actually connect. Okay, and let's say I delete these 3 frames here. That window will adjust to the shape. I mean, regardless, it just take whatever shape that we have and apply that window with the direction that we have and so on. Sorry? Well, you know, you're the boss there. You decide where to open, what size. But I mean, I think that's it about the curtain wall. I mean, obviously there's a lot more to show, which we will do in a second. But I just want to give maybe a quick overview of that before I move on to the other features. I think we will. Yeah, if you have some questions, just write it down. We will have a session questions after the whole first part. I think it'll be easier than stopping at each point. So you can write it down. You have these notes in your bags, notebooks that you can write on it if you want. So these are some of the examples that we, I think we have explored here in this. So I will move on with this presentation. Let me close this file because I have so many files open, just so we don't delay you. So hopefully that will not affect the performance. So that was more about the curtain wall tool and, you know, the new features in it and so on. One small thing that I have to admit in our region is not very commonly used, but I hope with today's presentation you might start considering it if you are doing this kind of design, this kind of architecture, or if you have this kind of requirement. Maybe you're familiar with this, that there's a connection between Rhinoceros and Grasshopper and ARCHICAD. We had this for the last, I think, 2 versions now. But so far, the connection was actually from Rhino and Grasshopper to ARCHICAD. It wasn't exactly the other way around. So basically, we were able to create, you know, these parameters and link them in. Yeah, it could be for those shapes of, you know, boundary shapes, or it could be for just having functions, which I think we will also demonstrate today. But I mean, we were just able to do that in one direction. So we do it in Grasshopper and goes to ARCHICAD. In this version, also, there's a new introduction of actually the ability to read information and data from the model, get it back to Grasshopper, get it analyzed, and we run these scripts on it and bring it back to ARCHICAD, which I think can open, you know, any new possibilities for design and workflow in general. So this, the idea, as I said, like that's what we had earlier. It was just through Grasshopper, Rhino, ARCHICAD. Now actually we can do it the other way around, and it's a full loop, and that is the concept of deconstruction. I will again run a quick demo, maybe to show some of these parts. So I have ARCHICAD and Rhino. Let me just run the connection. Okay, so basically, what we have here, we have an ARCHICAD, a basic study of zones. Let me close these. I think they're make these smaller. It's a bit hard to do it actually with the projector resolution, but let's see. So, you know, we have this basically here. So we have these zones that totally create an ARCHICAD. So I can select these zones here, and I can start by linking them to my Grasshopper. And in the script that we had is actually to apply slabs and columns. So once that is done, let's activate the code actually here. So basically, it will read this. It will apply this code where we have the columns and the slabs, and it will add it back to my model. And those are actual, you know, slabs and columns from ARCHICAD. So it's not an object or something. There are actual columns and so on, so we can work on. Now, based on this, one of the things that we can do, obviously, you know, in ARCHICAD, we can do, let's say, if it's you know, still at schematic level, we can get the information, the data, and even we can get some basic visualizations with the use of this link to see distribution of the zones between retail and offices and so on. And let's say while we're working, we started to change things. So let's say we want to adjust some of the zones here. So let's say I will select these zones and say we will extend them out by a few meters. And say we want to change also some of the functions of these zones. So these are not offices anymore. These are maybe retail. Yeah. So based on this changes, I can just send the changes back, and you can see it gets updated, and that will go back again to my ARCHICAD and add the columns, the slabs, or whatever logic that we have applied to the code. So you can see that actually now it gets updated. And we can, because again, that's actually a programming environment, we can apply any kind of logic. So I'll just show maybe some changes that we applied here. So let's say we decided to have some balconies here. So I'll just push this back by 2 meters here. 2 meters. And then again, 2 meters. And let's say also some of the residential would have balconies. Let's say these. Again, 2 meters pushed back. And then again, if I send the changes, it goes there, it gets updated. And based on the logic that we have applied, it will even remove columns. It will understand where to apply the slabs based on the logic that we have applied in the code. And that is, I mean, these are all, so you can see now, for example, it adjusts the slab, it removed the columns here, kept the slab, and so on. And that is all done automatically with native ARCHICAD elements. So those are still columns and zones, and I can quantify it. So for example, if I look at the adjusted calculations, you can see this is the new calculations, this is the new ratios, and so on, and that's all connected. So that is one, I think, of the uses, and you can take it further to have actually a more sophisticated. So this is also generated directly. We have a size of panels, it applied the panels, and so on. So you can do a lot actually with that, because again, it's a really programming, let's say, language. So that is one of the uses. And maybe another use that we can show is this. Let me switch. Okay, so now with this new tool, we are able, with the new tool, I mean, with the new enhancement of the current normal tool, we are able to do these patterns. But still, if we want to do something random, let's say how do you want to apply glass and spandrels. Let's say it's a bit random. If whatever we want to do randomly, as long as it's not a pattern, we still have to do it, you know, sort of manually. But that's where actually something like Grasshopper is really good. So you can see, for example, here with two sliders where I can actually control the ratio between glass panels and spandrels, and also I can control how random this is. Yeah. So let's say I'll have a little bit more, and you can here decide how random or centralized it is. And then you can just send it back to ARCHICAD, and this will be actual panels. So this is not a shape. This is a curtain wall, and these are panels that I can still work on. You know, it's a normal curtain wall, panels, and so on. So I think it's also a good example to use. So it's not just for the shapes, but could be even for sub-elements. Also, we can show, I think, another example here. So in this example, it's still the same, but you can see here, let's make this a bit smaller maybe. We have here something called a tractor, which is a point that actually, based on how close to this point you can do things. So in this example, it's how close the element is to this, how it controls the thickness of the frames. So you can see here it's a bit thick, and on top is thin. And when I move this, let's say I place it in the middle, you see the distribution is different. And if I place it, let's say, on top, you know, it's the same. And let's put it back here. So you can see here, it's thicker, thinner. And again, I send that back to ARCHICAD. And in ARCHICAD, I will have the same created by native elements. So that is still connected, created by native elements, and so on. Also, it is possible to still, and that was one of the main things that was driving this, is all of these irregular shapes. So we can look at maybe something like this shape here. And again, programmed there, I can control things like, you know, the division of the surface. So I can, maybe with this slider, I can control the divisions, numbers, the sizes, and maybe the height of this shape. Or even, because this is like a wave, so I have it linked to a structure form wave, I can actually control that. So let's say something like this. And again, send that back to ARCHICAD, and you will have that as a native ARCHICAD element. So this is, you know, it's using curtain wall actually, or a combination of curtain walls, but these are panels and frames and so on, and you can actually have it there. So as long as in ARCHICAD, you can, you know, document whatever you want. Those are few examples, I think, of using this environment. So it's not just to create these shapes. It could be for things that such environment is good at, is something like creating random elements, creating these logic between elements. We can do that quite easily in Grasshopper. And actually, it's interesting because, as I said, it's not very common in our region to use this tool. But we are thinking, and we will run maybe a survey through you and other users. If you're interested to be introduced to this, we can hold workshops that are just dedicated to that, and actually collaboration with the guys from Grasshopper. I mean, we were thinking of that, but we're not sure if people, I know it looks cool and everyone wants it, but I don't know if you are actually doing such kind of architecture or do you have this need? So that's the part that, yeah, it's cool and everyone wants to know it, but I don't know if you're actually using it. So, yes, sir.
The first distribution.
Yeah.
Can you use it to check the exposure and the percentage of the glazing? Let's say in regulations.
Yes. You absolutely can. Actually, to check that, it will be interesting. Actually, I'll show it now in ARCHICAD how you do it. But even within Grasshopper, you can even set that as limitations then. So for example, in ARCHICAD, I can check the result. I can see the result, what is the percentage, the coverage, and so on. But you can also, correct. Yeah, you can control it based on orientation. But I'm saying is even there, you can set within Grasshopper an optimization limits that actually, even when it's randomizing it, it doesn't exceed so and so. So that is also. I am not an expert in this, so you know, if we decide to have this workshop, we will have actually the right people for that. but I know that it's actually definitely possible, and I know in ARCHICAD we can get the results, because in ARCHICAD it's native. It will be just normal patterns, panels, and so on. So I'll close this again, and we will carry on with our presentation. Okay. Right. So we talked about the modeling part mainly, and I think now we will talk about how we can add to the detailing of the model in general, and the information, the level of information in my model, what kind of information we can do. And those are the two main features that I would mention in this part of the presentation. The first one is actually adding, basically, we know Profile Manager, I think, is a powerful tool for so many years, but now it became way more powerful because now it's parametric. Because we always face situation where, yeah, I want this combination, I want this wall, but yeah, I have one variation of it that doesn't have a cluster on one side, or I have one variation where the column has 2 connections instead of 3, and we had to create different types. Now we have more of a parametric one that actually we can just have one, and that will take care of all the instances or these samples or situations that we have. So that's one that we'll talk about. And the other thing that was introduced now is to actually being able to add logic to our quantities or to our information. So far, we were able to extract directly information like width, depth, or physical. But for example, if I want to know how many boxes of tiles I should buy for this, so not only we can now apply logic. So we used to do this in spreadsheet, and now actually we can do it, and we can do it not just as a spreadsheet style. We can actually do it now in ARCHICAD on element level, which means it will be linked to that element. That means we can then tag it. We can extract this information. So it's not just a thing that we do on the side. It's actually now embedded in the element, and we will talk about that in a second. One thing also with, year after year, we've noticed that people are actually getting better at modeling, and from the collective data from the users, we found that actually since 2013, there's around almost 75% more elements in their models. So we wanted a better experience. ARCHICAD is well known among all the other BIM software that is actually, it's very fast, it's very responsive compared to the others, and still we wanted to enhance that. So one of the major enhancements here is related to 2D, and it's actually a patent sort of technology that we looked at, or the developers basically looked at how the map programs work, Google Maps or whatever, Apple Maps, and it used this concept of tiling, that actually it takes the whole image or the whole area and it tiles it down to a smaller boxes. And that's exactly what we did now with 2D drawings. So it will allow us to actually open a drawing, and it will show a massive drawing, open a drawing, it starts tiling it based on how dense the parts are, cache that in, so when you're moving around, it's actually quite smooth. I'll show a short clip about this parametric profiles, and then we can, maybe I show the parts live. So I think that gives you an idea of what I'm going to present is this profiles with ability to have it more of a parametric one. So we'll go through that. This is an example of what we had earlier. We had a parametric ones, which was maybe columns, which were columns and beams that are circular or rectangular and so on. And we had the standard ones, and then we had complex. But as I said, these kind of changes needed to that we have different profiles or different create different composites and so on. So we'll see now how we can actually from one have all of these actually in one type. So basically, I'll select this, and maybe we can start editing it. So again, hopefully you recognize the profile manager here. It's still the same, but what we have as an addition, the new thing is these modifiers. So we can start actually adding modifiers here. So I can say, I'll start adding modifier. Let's say height, and let's say we'll add width. And one thing about these modifiers that actually we have them when you create new ones, it's saved in the list, so you can use them shared. So if you always referring to the height of a beam or design edge, that it's always standard, so you know that it's standardized throughout all your projects. So for anyone taking care of like a BIM manager or a BIM coordinator or someone in charge of this will make things easier. That actually you don't have to worry about that because you can use them from the list. So let's say we have those, and let's say in the height, I want to link these two edges. So basically, I just click here and start linking these edges. Now these two edges are linked, which means when I move one, the other one will move, and we'll see it in a second. And let's say the width part. So again, I want maybe this edge and this edge, but I also want consistent. So I want these two edges to move with it. So we can also add more edges. So let's say this edge and let's say this edge. So now you can see that actually, for example, when I highlight this B, all of these four are highlighted. Let's add a little bit, few others. Let's say we'll add the web thickness, and let's say here TR. So let's say in this the TW, I want to add this. So these are now also a part of the modifier, and maybe in this we will add a link between this point and let's say this edge. And again, I want to link more edges to it. So we're not limited to sort of one edge. We can add more. So let's say we'll have this edge here, and let's say this edge. For now, we will just save it as it is and see what changes do we have. So let's say save, and then let's go back here. Now, maybe you noticed here, I know there's these blue lines, and now these are actually all part of the modifiers. So we can actually control each one of them, based on whatever rules that we have applied there. And so we can have this, and that's still one profile that allows me to do that. Let's carry on with editing a little bit more. So let's say we will add concrete around it. So I'll pick the concrete here, and I'll draw concrete box here, let's say, and let's maybe offset it a bit out. So let's start with maybe 5 centimeters, and then let's say also we'll add some plaster to that. So again, I'll just pick plaster, again draw here, and let's offset by 20. Now, one thing I know if you noticed that we didn't have to worry about subtracting the part because that is taken care of by the building material priority, so it cuts directly. So let's say we have this, and let's say we will add few modifiers for the concrete protection. So I'll add offset modifier. So let's say I'll add it, and let's say here I want the option to control each side individually. So I'll just add 4 different modifiers. So offset 1, 2, let's say 3, and 4. Okay, So let's say we have these, and now I can start linking them. So let's say offset 1 will be between the edge or this corner of steel and the concrete, and I also want the plaster, let's say, to move with it. And offset 2 will be again, let's say, from here, here, and also I want the plaster to move with it. 3. If anyone is sleeping, the one next to him or her, please wake her up. But we're done here. It's okay. Okay, we're done. We're done. Don't worry. You made it. Okay, so that is basically we created these modifiers for 4 corners, yeah. And now if I save that and go back, and now so I have this this profile now with the concrete, and it shows like when I'm moving it, let's say the relation between them, or I can change the offset from each side. And even if I don't want part of it, let's say I want this to be set to, I don't know, let's say 0. I don't want the steel part anymore. Let's say, sorry, the thickness of it, let's say you set it to 0 here, and to set it to, and even if you cannot control it here, you can always have a list of modifiers here. So for example, I want the TW to be 0, so it's 0 here. And now I have just a concrete wall, or sorry, concrete column in this case. And these lines are not shown, they're not calculated, and it's identified as a different type. So it's not something to worry about. As long as it's 0, it doesn't exist in the model, it doesn't exist in the quantifications and so on. Just to show a few of the uses of this. So for example, for the same column here, we can see the same column being used in different locations, like this is with, with the concrete, but again, because of thanks to this building material priority, you can see the intersections correctly. You can see the relation between the elements here, or let's say here, corner where you have it there as a part of it. And also what you can, when we can schedule it, so we can schedule it, and we can schedule those modifiers that we have listed. So you can see it here, the modifiers. So for example, let's assume, I think it's a bit small. So let's change the concrete covering for one of the samples. So let's say change it to 20. Let's say we change it to 20. But so obviously one thing I want to show you that actually is not linked to the others. It affects only those those columns selected, but also that these modifiers could be listed, and we can control it individually in schedules and so on. And let's say there is a requirement, the requirement that all the steel columns should be covered by at least 40 or 50 or whatever concrete. So we can also run graphical override based on that. So based on this, I can run a graphical override that actually checks which columns has less than whatever amount of covering highlighted. So this, for example, has less than, I think 30 is set here. So it's highlighted here, and I can see it here. I can see it in the plans very easily highlighted with a color, so I can actually run sort of a check on the elements that I have. Obviously, that is also very helpful when it comes to walls, especially partitions where we have a lot of layers and combinations. So this is an example. Let's take this wall and look at it. And here, as we said, we can control these things directly in 3D, or we can always look at the modifiers that we have. So let's say in this example, let's say this wall has tiling from one side, but not from the other. So I can set that to 0, and that is a wall that has tiling from one side, none from the other, and I can control whatever I want individually as long as the modifier is there. And that was usually required us to create a new type. Now we can just have one type that actually has so many combinations that we can use. Most probably you're already thinking of uses of this, so many uses. So I'll just show you some of the silly ones just to even think that you can do these things. So for example, this is a wall, that's one, everything that you see here is done by profile. But I want to show you, for example, these edges are linked. You remember when you're linking the edges, there was like these small arrows that shows direction. And these, for example, are in 2 different directions. So we stretch one, the other goes in. Or for example, these seats here, if I select this one here and let's say I can set this down, and then we have, you know, different type of seat, or even the other one here. Let's say we select this here, and let's say again, if I put this down, I would have flipped the seating to the other side, and so on. So there's a lot I think that we can do with the new profile modifiers, and we will have again more examples about it after the break. But now I will move to the other topic or other feature, which is the expressions. It's actually what Georgia, or part of what Georgia asked earlier, which is basically calculating. Let's say if we wanted to calculate, let's say this is a shading device, and we wanted to check how much it's actually, you know, covering out of the surface or something. So basically, what we had earlier, what we were able to calculate, let's say earlier, was out of a curtain wall tool, we can say, you know, we can quantify the total panel surface area. So how many panels are there, solid panels, and we can basically have this the overall surface area. But we still needed to do this calculation. So in this case, we want actually the no panels. So it is, you know, 1 minus the division times 100, so we can get the percentage. So now we can do this directly in ARCHICAD. So in ARCHICAD, for example, we were able to extract the total panel surface area, which is what I mentioned here, and the surface area, but we were not able to do this calculations per element. Now we can actually quite easily do that. So I can just go to properties. And again, just by hand, who's not familiar with properties or property manager in ARCHICAD? It's okay, yeah. Okay, so basically properties in ARCHICAD are actually sort of a tags that you attach to the elements, yeah? So you can say, let's say this is a chair, and you wanted to know who's the manufacturer, or you wanted to know if the client approved it or not, or any kind of information that is not necessarily related to geometry. You can create a property and pretty much attach it to it, yeah? So this was what we used properties for, and now we can actually also add an expression that is not just a tag, it's actually a calculation, and then create a tag and pretty much attach it to the element. So in this case, let's say if we want to create this, I have the shading system transparency rate. We have a new type, which is called expression here, yeah? And expressions, if you are familiar with expressions in spreadsheets or Excel, where we can actually do calculations, it's pretty much the same as a concept, as the same commands and so on, but it's within ARCHICAD. So I can start by calculating that. I'll say that minus, and then I can start using the, you know, the parameters that I'm using or properties that I'm familiar with. So for example, in this case, I'm using from curtain wall, and this is, for example, the case where Georgia was asking, I think, where we can specify even by directions, you know, east, north, whatever. But in this case, we're looking for a total panel surface area. So we want to see where the panels, you know, area is located. So this is total panel surface area. We took it from here, and then we want to divide it by, again, I think we will go with the surface area including boundary, and then times, and by the way, even this times or dividing, I'm taking it from the keyboard, but we can always use it. So the list of, and we will talk about this in details, I don't want to overwhelm you with that, but you can take it from here directly. So let's say times 100. And the next thing is we assign it to elements, because this attribute or this parameter makes sense only with specific type of elements, you know. So we want to assign to that. So I'll assign it to, let's say, shading system. And now when I go to, let's say, curtain wall shading schedule, I'll see that actually it calculated the shading system transparency rate for me. And that is driven from the model. Thank you very much. One from the audience clapped. Thank you. All right. So that is one use. I think that is I think it's a good example of using it. But I'll just show a couple of more uses. One is actually, for example, if we had a building and we had maybe requirement of a relation between glass and the areas, let's say. Sorry? Yeah, okay, that's. I'm not sure actually. Is it here by the? So for what kind of buildings is it? Not, but not per room, right? It's per elevation, per room. Okay, okay, cool. Okay. Well, so okay, that's a good example. I don't know, but I know, for example, even schools. I remember when we were designing, it was a big thing. So you can actually run this directly now. I'm not going to type it in, but just show you the basic idea that actually we create a property that reads. So we take the value of per room, the area of the glass or the windows, the area of the room, divide it, and if we are meeting the design requirement, it looks at it if we are meeting or not. So if we are, in this case, it's smaller, it types like not enough sunlight, or okay. So it's a short if function that actually if that logic is true, give me this result or that result. So we can do that, and we can look at it here. In this building, it calculates actually the so here you can see, and that is per room, yeah? So it's per room reading this information, giving me that. It could be also used for, again, the idea of per room. Let's say if we were designing this and we wanted to know, let's say it's some sort of a startup building, and each office is rented by new company, and they want to put stations. And I wanted to know how many workstations we can put, or how many people, or how many desks we can put in. So like per allocation. Yes, definitely. And there is an example of it after the break. After the break, we'll have a specific example. Here, it is a general one, but you can definitely do it based on the usage. So here we just have a simple one, which says, each desk will take, I don't know, 8 meters. And we want to see how many we can fit in. So again, it's a simple code. Let's say, let me show first that what we have here is basically, the zone, the area, and how many of this, and then we want to be able to calculate how many workstations do we have. Yeah. So basically, what we have to do is we want to divide the area of that room by whatever number that we decided is enough for a workstation. But since we don't want 2 and 3 desks, we want it as a full number. So we use this command, which is round down. So it actually takes the result and rounds it down. So just to do that, we'll just go to Property Manager again. And let's say here, we have the actual area that we decided. So we said here it's 8 meters per area per capita. And here we will do the calculation. So I'll just go to expression. And let's say I don't know where it's round down. So I can just start by typing it. And I can just find it here. So round down. And usually when I put any of these expressions or commands, I will have what we call these placeholders, so you know how this works. So it shows first that we have to put the number, and then the second part is this rounding, so to what extent that we want. So the number in this case is actually a calculation that we wanted to run the calculation. So I can just go to zones in this case, zone. So I want the calculated area, divided by a parameter that I have set, yeah, which is here, which is area per capita. And here I want to round it. Actually, I want the full number, so it's 0. And then we decide where to assign it. So I want it to be assigned to a specific type of spaces. Let's say not all spaces, just incubator spaces. And based on that, I'll just click OK. And if I open up the schedule list now, it'll show me actually how many workstations are there. And not only this, we want, let's say, to represent that visually. I want a color code using the graphical override, where it showed me that the space, if it's 1 to 2, it's a blue. If it's, and so on, I have a color code. And we can run that. And let's say the number that we have, 8, is quite big. Let's go with something smaller. Those are small companies. So we can actually go there. And let's say, well, instead of 8, we will go with, say, 4, 5, whatever. Let's say 5. And based on that, it will change the color coding because it's recalculating everything and shows the color coding and so on. Another good use of it, and good use of the fact that these are not calculated in a schedule, those are actually embedded in the elements, are tags. Earlier when we wanted tags, we might have different requirements for the elements. So the information that I show for the column are different from the door, different from the walls, and so on. Now actually using the same method, we can have one tag that actually has sequence. So basically it says, if it's door, show this information. If it's column, show this information, and so on. So I will pick that here, tag info, and I'll start placing it. And for example, it shows as a column, show me the name, the height, what is the composite, and the size. But for a door, and it's the same tag, it showed me, the name, the orientation opening, and the size. It might show a different thing for a beam or for a wall. So we can actually have one tag or one tag actually that actually reads an expression based on the element type. It extracts different kind of information. That is pretty much it for this part about the expressions. I want to show you the enhancement that we talked about regarding the 2D 2D navigation. Using the styling technique, and actually you can see the tiling pattern, I think, quite obviously here. This is a map of London. It contains lines in the millions. Actually, the number of lines here are in the millions. But you can see now, let's say I'll zoom in to some part. So once it loaded up all these tiles, I can just zoom in and work with these very, very freely. And these are all lines, yeah? So those are very tiny lines, but you can see that's actually quite smooth to work on it. And this, I think it contains, I'm not sure, but actually millions, like 5 million or so. So hopefully this will save you time while working on drawings, and working on heavy drawings and so on. I think we are pretty much moving towards the last part of this demo, which will cover mainly BIMx. So we talked so far about the authoring part, creating it and so on, but we also want to cover the enhancement that happened with BIMx and data access and so on. There is two major enhancements that happened. One is actually related to BIMx that we know for now, and I'll talk about that in a second. And the other enhancement is there's a totally new engine that will enable us to handle any size in BIMx. For now, it's a separate product, but after a while, they'll get merged. So it's more of a test now, but I'll show you both now. So basically what we tried to do with the developers, again, I wasn't part of the developing team. What they tried to do is enhance the user experience and the performance, basically, of it. Let me connect. I'll need to connect my iPad, so if you just give me a second. So we can do it. Actually, during that, if you have questions, maybe we can address some while I connect this. So feel free if you have any questions for the part that you've seen. No? Okay. Is this a good thing or a horrible thing? Yeah, let me just try to connect this. Actually, it should be fine. Okay. So yeah, it shows now. Okay. So now in BIMx, who is not familiar with BIMx in the room? Okay, cool. Well, BIMx basically is the mobile app that allows you to look at your design, share it with others. You can have access to your model. You can get information about the elements in the model. And it also contains the drawings. So I can start looking at let's say some drawings here. That actually it contains, so the drawings, whatever we decided to publish with the model, it contains it in you know, in the same environment that you can look at them and so on. I think there is a delay between the connection and yeah, just give it a second. Okay, so you can see these relation between the drawings and the model, and it doesn't matter what kind of drawings do you have. So let's say if I look at the sections and I want to compare, you know, the section with the model, also runs that I can actually look at model, look at the section, and it also has a VR module. You have, I think, the VR cards in your bags where you can download it on your phone and just start playing VR directly out of it. Now, what is new in this version mainly is we had these favorites where we can export favorite views that I can actually click on, and you see it moves from one view to another. Now, but unfortunately now they can add if they have. That is the thing. Now they can add. So if you want, that is one of the things, because earlier if you wanted to add one, we had actually do it back in ARCHICAD. While here we can actually pick any new view and just add it directly here. So let's say this is a test, and it goes here. But we can also easily edit. So if we want to rearrange the views, if you want to turn some, we can just do it on the go. And also we can, if you don't want that, we can just go with the play. So if you go with the play method, it goes like a what do you call it, like a slideshow. So if I move from one to the other, you see it goes through those. And even I can click play and actually goes into automatic loop. So it go from one view to the other automatically. Yeah. And even if you wanted to interrupt that, you can at any point stop it, move around, and then carry on with your presentation, because that is how, you know, how BIMx works. So you can put this, imagine this putting, I don't know, putting it, as you said, in a booth or for a client in front of your, you can just put these and actually start, you know, showing these parts. So this is one of the new things, let's say, in it. The other part, I think that I need to show you actually after the break, because I need to reconnect online. But basically now we have also an online viewer. So if you don't want to go with BIMx as an app, you can give them a link and they can just go online, open the model and experience the same thing, drawings and so on. And you can even embed that. If you don't want to use Graphisoft website, you can actually take a code like what you have with YouTube and just embed that in your website. So you can actually run it directly on your website. I will show you that after the break. The last thing that I want to show is the other enhancement that I told you, the new enhancement actually, which is the new engine. Because so far we were limited with the memory of the devices, you know, and we had to optimize a lot of the models to be able to use, because otherwise it will just crash if it's so heavy, because these phones or so on. And now with this new engine, it's still under testing. Actually, you can download it if you want to play around with it. You can try it. It's called BIMx Lab, but this engine eventually will be merged with BIMx. So this is an example of a survey. Actually, it's the Opera House in Budapest. It's very, very detailed model. But you can see is actually we can just run it here smoothly. And how it works basically, it just loads the elements that you're seeing. So the way that it actually manipulates the memories, as you can see, when I zoom out, it starts loading elements. So it's trying to utilize or optimize actually the RAM or the, you know, the resources of the machine for such thing. And this is actually very, very detailed one. Let me maybe show you a section. You can see. can see this is quite detailed as a building. It's actually this is a laser scanned building, and then import to ARCHICAD. So hopefully this will be soon the standard engine of BIMx. So we will not have a limitation anymore in terms of size, and that would be, I think, would be great, because we still have sometimes to optimize things. We have just a few more things to mention before we wrap up the first part. For the ones using BIM server or BIM cloud here, how many by hand? Who's using BIM server, BIM cloud? All right, cool. Now there's a very small change, that we don't have a product called BIM server anymore. We will just have something called BIM Cloud Basic. It's still free, it's still the same features, just the naming. So we have two products now, BIM Cloud Basic and BIM Cloud. And this is basically the environment that runs ARCHICAD and BIMx connections and so on. I'm not going to go through the details, but I think the most important thing to know that the name has changed. There's no BIM server anymore, it's BIM Cloud Basic and BIM Cloud. And that, as we had before, the new features will only be applied to BIM Cloud, not to BIM Cloud Basic. BIM Cloud Basic will stay as it is, the free one. It will keep on running, no plans to stop it or anything, but there's no new features. While the BIM Cloud is getting more and more actually features. One of them is, for example, how you have that you need to reserve in BIM server any element, let's say, before using it. BIM Cloud Server, if it's free, it's for you directly. You don't need, so it's one click, saving you one click. You get, you can use now email addresses to log in and out, so it's easier than remembering your name handles, and there's actually performance also optimization that happens, and a few other things related to backups and so on. Anyways, that is very short. One thing also that one thing I want to mention before we carry on, that we also have introduced newly, I don't know if you're familiar with it, we will announce it very soon. So far you had an option where ARCHICAD is just perpetual. So you just purchase ARCHICAD for once, and that's it, you own it forever. We are introducing, and that will not go away, that will remain forever, there's no question about it, but we're introducing an option for renting ARCHICAD for a year period. So for the offices that, especially the offices that have a core of ARCHICAD licenses, but they have people coming in and out, maybe they want to go with rental options, and rentals actually breaks down to roughly 17 dirhams a day. Anyways, more details. You can find out more about it in detail if you want. You can just go to bimes.com/buy. You will find actually the details and even an inquiry if you want to know about it. I will just I'll just end up with this clip about the new features, and then we will have questions, sessions, and then a break. Oops, no, that was quick. Hold on, no. You have to see the clip. I didn't put it here, just, yeah. Well, thank you very much. And, if you have questions, let's turn on the lights. All right. I did. So if you have any questions before we go out for a break, we can, yes.
Can I use the new ARCHICAD with the altered version
No, but why would you do that? Sorry.
all of my team are using the old ARCHICAD.
No, then you install the new BIM. So you install BIM Cloud Basic, and then they are able to, because BIM Cloud Basic will contain, well, on a machine you can install more than one BIM server. That's fine. So if you have different modules, you can, but you cannot work on the same project with different versions of ARCHICAD. So the project, if you are using 22, then they have to use 22 with you. Does that make sense to you that you're doing one part? Because how will their program read it if that feature is not doesn't exist in their program? It does, but like you will have the features like all the other older versions. When you save back, it will save back, but if the tool or feature is not there, it will be missing. Yeah, but you can always save back definitely. But if the feature doesn't exist, so in that there's always workaround. So if you want just the geometry, you can save it as an object. Can you save geometry? But yes, you cannot have the functions back. You can save back. If it doesn't contain any of these functions, that's fine. The file will work smoothly and everything is fine. But if something doesn't exist there, it will not be translated.
So if I save that custom pattern,
okay.
I opened it with ARCHICAD.
To be honest, I didn't check it, but I can imagine that it will be a custom curtain wall. I think I haven't tested.
So I will use the customization, but I can read it.
I cannot confirm, to be honest. I didn't test it, but I'm thinking that it might be converted as a custom. But that means it's a custom. There's no pattern that you can control. That is, I think, the best case that we can get out of it. Yeah. Any other questions? No? All right. Okay, well. So we will head down to the restaurant, local, downstairs for lunch. And we will be back in an hour. So let's say by 1 o'clock, if that makes sense. Yeah? All right. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay. Well, I think it's a good time to start. Before we start, I have actually a confession. In your bags, you should have T-shirts, but unfortunately, they were delayed. So I will be sure to ship the T-shirts to your offices. And the other thing is we will play a small draw towards the end of this training. We have 2 hard hats. to share with you. So if you don't mind, please just in the bags you have these notepads. Just write your name on a page, full page. Take out the page, and someone will pass by to put it in a bowl, and then we will use it to withdraw. If you want a hard hat, if you don't want a hard hat, don't bother.
Can I use one of the ones?
Well, that's called cheating. If that works, do it. Yes, that also, but don't worry, give it a try. Okay, so we'll start with the second part, which is mainly going through a little bit more in details of what we covered in the first session. We will have two parts. The first part will be about the curtain wall, and then the second part we will have then a short break, and then the second part we will go through the more of, again, the expressions and the profiles and so on. Feel free while we're going, actually, because this is more relaxed than just a presentation, feel free to raise your hand if you have questions, so we can answer them while we're, while we're doing it. Yeah. So start with, I think we covered these. Just to remind you, with different types of curtain walls that we tried to cover in the first session. Sorry, just one. يمنى هن راح يكونوا كاتبين على صفحة، بس خذي الصفحة منهم. Okay? All right. So we will go actually with in a typical curtain wall. We'll just cover the basic elements or components of it, and then we see how that reflects to the new one. So mainly in curtain walls, we will have vertical and horizontal grids, and within those we will have our mullions, transoms, and maybe boundary frames, and then we have panels. Now the types of those are different types, but that's the general terminology of or in a curtain wall. The basic workflow in ARCHICAD usually is a pattern-based workflow. So we will start by showing the different types or different options that we have that are new to the curtain wall. I'm guessing everyone here is familiar with the old curtain wall tool. Is there anyone that have never used the old curtain wall tool? All right. Fine. So we will look at this. The first example we will have is we will use a simple curtain wall. So it's a very simple pattern. You see, it's two parts. And what we had earlier was this only one option, which is fixed size. So we had to know the size of the pattern and then draw it. So basically, based on that, if I had to draw this curtain wall here, let's say, you can see the feedback while I'm drawing. And then when I finish, so if you look at it, there's like a full pattern, full, and then whatever remains from the first panel. So it just fills and then strips it, or just adds, just repeats it within the boundary. So that was one option. Now, the other option that we have is that we go with, let's say, best divisions. In best divisions, best division basically it tries to accommodate that pattern as a full number of repetitions within the space. However, in that you also have control because you don't, so it might stretch it a little bit more or less to fix it. But let's say you don't want all the pattern members to be stretched. You can, that's why we have this lock. So you can lock some elements. So for example, in this, if we locked B, that means B will always be maintained. So whatever we have in B will always be maintained. It's just a part will be stretched up or down to be accommodated. So based on that, let's say if I go with best division and again try to draw it, as you can see, while I'm drawing it, it starts adjusting itself till actually I reach the point where I want. Let's say here, click, and it places that. So, you know, this column B is fixed. It's just A that's being stretched up or down till it accommodates. So now, if you remember when we started, we had, I think A was 1,450. Sorry, is there anyone that didn't put their names in the draw? Hmm? Okay. Fine. So we have this, but when we change the scale, so this might be a different size. So I can measure it here. Let's say you can see now it's 51524, or you can read it within the element. So if I want to know, what is the size and maybe use it again, we can also in the same dialog, I can just go back to fixed size and it'll show me actually what is the size that was adjusted to. Yeah, so I can see that size here. The third option, again, with the curtain wall, the third option that I'm going to draw is actually that reads number of division. Again, it's very clear that I just this time select the number of divisions. So let's say here in this case, I want 6 divisions. And again, I have the same option of locking one or more of the pattern parts. So I know that again, it will maintain the 750. It will adjust just the other number. So I'll say 6, and then start drawing it. And you can see how it's actually stretching to whatever distance I place. Yeah. So those are mainly the 3 types of repetition of the patterns. However, show some also new changes in this. So for example, in this, as we said, in the first option, which is a fixed size, so we had full pattern, and then whatever is remaining, it repeats just the last pattern and so on. In this version, we actually have an option for the partial patterns, the fill patterns, to have a specific type. So we will talk about types in a second, but it could be, so for example, I can say whatever fill patterns, like fill-in patterns, the additional ones that are not part of the original pattern, not the full pattern, you can fill it with a specific panel. So I'll say make them all distinct. So the ones that are actually not part of panel, it'll be just distinct. It's just add a panel type. And as you remember, maybe that was in the earlier ones also, that we can control the distribution of this pattern within. So I can say like this is starting from the left. I can say, well, center it. So in this case, it will center, and again, it will consider this distance divided on both sides and apply whatever I have selected. The same thing, or sorry, a similar thing with the other options is that we can control. So for example, here, if you remember, we went with best division. Yeah, so it was dividing it. But let's say best division, but still I want to end up with a specific part of this. So now it ends up with B. Let's say I want this to end up with A. I don't want it to end up with B. So I can say with A, and again, it will rearrange itself. So it will actually end up with A. So it's still applying the same logic, but I can say will end up with specific part of the pattern. And obviously that applies to both. Yeah, it applies to both. So it gives you pretty much a flexibility to do. And sorry, I was so far showing you that on columns, but you can obviously do this exact same thing on rows, or not. I mean, you can apply a different logic per part. So this is the result. Okay, and I think in the first part we went through this the Freiburg the library, and the option of number is it becomes very like when we can set a set number of rows or columns, can be very helpful, because in this case, if we wanted to do it with fixed for these angles, we had actually to do calculations per facade to be able to know, what is the exact based on the angle, the exact space, and so on. While here, actually, we could have solved that with just going with number of divisions, and it will arrange itself based on that, and we can get what we have here. One thing to remember, that even though we have this, we still can customize things. So the things that we were able to do in 21 or earlier, we can still do it. So for whatever reason, if I want this, as just that's the way I want to close this. I want still to add a pattern here that is not part of this, or I add a panel that is not part of pattern. I can still do the same things that I used to do. So I can pick the frame. I don't know. I'll apply a frame here, let's say, and I will, match it with this, and I will have. So we still have this freedom. It's not taken out. It just adds to the amount of things that we can do with the pattern, the amount of things that we can get directly out of the curtain wall. A quick game sort of thing is, how do you think we can get this out of this? So if we have this and I want to change it to this shape, just any thoughts? It's something that we have to work out on again. All right, well, let me show you. Basically, with this new fill type, I can decide that the fill-in patterns are specific type, and then let's say in this case, I will center the pattern that I have, and so basically the pattern is centered, and everything else is. And remember, this is the logic applied, which means if I stretch or something, that will always be repeated. Yeah. So that the game, no, the Tetris, I'm not. There is actually, that's something for you to explore. Actually, it has Tetris embedded, so if you want to play around with it, you can find it later. So that is more about actually placing the. But just one thing before we carry on, just one thing I want to show you, that yeah, so that I think you've noticed this, that this looks quite similar to what we have with the railing tool in terms of this idea of structure of elements, the idea that I can deal with. We will go through that more in details, but that I can work with the elements here individually and so on. So that's also a bit different from what we had in 21. 21 was just a feedback rather than actually interactive one that we can work on. We will talk a little bit now about the frames and panel classes. So the idea that we are not limited anymore with two types of each or something. The sample that we're going to go with is this building. It's the Alliance headquarters in Budapest, and they're using this actually as an example, the curtain wall, which is this, and we'll see how we can actually do it in ARCHICAD. Now, if we look at the pattern again, I think that was something we discovered or discussed in the first part, that actually everything breaks down to a pattern usually. So once we identify this pattern, we can work on it. So the pattern that we have has this grid, and then you see the frames are applied to parts of it, the panels are applied to parts of it, and so on. I will take this as a reference while I'm working on it. So I'll just take this here, and let's see what we can do with this. So I'll select. So what I placed is just a curtain wall, empty curtain wall, with the grid placed. So there's no elements yet. It's just the grid. Yeah. So I can look at it. It's just the grid. So just to save time, you know how to add grids, obviously. So once we add this, and let me open just the image so I can look at it, because I cannot remember everything in it. Okay. So basically, we want to use this in this logic here. Yeah. So we have the grid, and maybe it is a good thing to start with the frames. So if I go to frames, I will have, I'll have mullions, transom, corner, and boundary, the ones that we talked about. These two classes, corner and boundary, cannot be deleted. Those are part of the tool. You just cannot delete them. You can change, you can apply different types and all, but you cannot delete it as a class. There will always be that. These, everything else could be added, modified, and so on. Because you know where these applies, right? I mean, you know, a corner obviously to a corner and boundary to the edges of it. So those will not be. I mean, you cannot delete them. But let's go, for example, with a transom here, and let's say we'll keep it as it is. One thing that we will also go into details about, that actually we have more types for the frames. Not only the corner, actually all the frames. We have more types, especially the ones that are utilizing the profile manager, that we can use profile manager for. So we'll use it as it is, but let's say I want to override it with black, let's say. So let's say I want to override the surface of this transom with black. And let's say, going back to the scheme, I want to start applying the frames to it. So I'll just use this as my little cheat sheet, and then I can start selecting, you know, using shift, you can start adding frames or adding it to your selection. So I'm selecting these, you know, this. If I missed one, please let me know. So let's say these. Actually, let's start with the horizontal ones. With the horizontal ones, you have these two buttons that allow you to select the full line and the repetitive one. So I can select them all in one go. And let's say those will be the transoms. Yeah, this is what we've created. So you can get an instant feedback. And then I'll start selecting maybe these, let's say this, this here, this one, this, and this. Maybe these three. And this. Let's say these also, I can apply. And you see, here we have the types, and we'll see how to add to them. But for now, we're just using the ones that are existing. And let's say we will use this again, transom. And then still, I don't want this frame. And I don't want this frame. Does that make sense? Am I missing? Yeah. Okay. And I'll maybe add one here. Now, so let's say we have the frames in place. Now, one thing though, if you notice, when I'm selecting, so let's say here we have two, yeah? There's no frame in between them, but it shows as two separate panels, yeah? That's why we have two types of this non-existing. It used to be called hidden. Now we have one that's called division, and one is called none, which merges actually those panels. So if I select this, it merges this into one panel, yeah? So in this case, I would say most of these actually should be turned to none. Yeah, so I'll say these are none. So that will merge all of these into, you know, one panel. Now we'll go to panels, and we will see how we can create more panels, because so far we have only distinct and main. And let's say here we'll have at least this green, darker green, you know, light green, and maybe window. Let's say those are the classes that we want. And it's very simple. We just go to add, and let's say we'll create a new one. Or we can duplicate the one that we have. We can duplicate the main one, and we call it green dark, let's say. Yeah, so it's green dark. It's just a panel. And green dark, we will also override the color. And maybe we select this green here. So we have green now here. And we will add another one. We call it green, maybe light. And again, green light. Let's say we use this color. And we will add also window. So I'll say, again, we can do the same thing. So we can go with window. So I can say a new type, and I call it window. And in window, you remember we can always select different types. So I can select the window or so on. But instead of that, actually, what I will do is I can select one from my favorites. So I also have favorites. I don't have to create them. So I can select from favorites, and maybe I have this window that already has a black frame, and I can select it and add it to my class. So I can utilize favorites also in classes. And I mean, you're familiar with the options that you have with window, right? You have the all the options of what is the design of the window, what is the frame color, and so on. So it's already done. So based on this, I have, let's say, the classes that I want. And then I go back to the scheme. Let's again open up the image. And based on this, I'll say, well, I want this whole row and this whole row to be, you will find there now green dark. So it's green dark. Oh, sorry, I think I selected that. So this is green dark. And then I want this row, this and this to be all, you know, green light. And then maybe these two to be glass, which is main panel in this case. And then I want this to be a window. And that's pretty much it. If I click OK now, this will get updated with the pattern that I have just applied. Yeah, so that is the pattern. So working with the pattern or classes is quite easy, I think, in that environment. It's not a complicated thing. And I think also utilizing the favorites is good because you have panels that you'll be using more and more, so you can just utilize that. The next example that we will go through is this, creating a sort of a honeycomb shape. And in this example, we will cover two things. One is how to deal with this sort of diagonal frames, and actually the profile frames, the type of these new profile frames. So we will start again with a simple empty curtain wall. And again, working from here, I'll say, you know, I want these. You can see, you know, actually, if these are clear, you can see these small icons here where we can introduce crossing frames or diagonal frames. So I can say, well, you know, I want this here, and this is here, here, and here. And again, because I want these to be one panel, right? I don't want them to be small panels, so I can select the frames, and I can delete them or turn them into none. And then let's say, again, these three here, none. And then also I want these to be unified maybe, so I'll select these frames. Yeah, so in terms of panels, it's okay now. Let's go and see what we can do with the frames. So in frames, let's say we create a new classification, new classification of frames. So I'll add one, and I'll call it honeycomb, let's say. And in this, we are going to use one of the new ones, which is the profile frame. What does the profile frame do? It's actually, if I select that, it will allow me to pick different profiles for the frame and the cap. So I can have actually a profile for frame and cap. So this does not make sense. So let's select another one. So let's say the body of the frame is this, and the cap is this. And now we'll see how actually we create them. So we have this frame. And let's say I want also the boundary frames to have the same type. Yeah, let's say I want them to have the same type. We can easily copy and paste attributes between these classes. So if I want that to match the boundary frame, let's say I can just paste this honeycomb into my boundary frame, so it will have the same attributes. Yeah, so it's similar to the injection of attributes, but within this dialog, so we can do that. So let's say that, and then we have yet to select actually apply these frames. So I'll select now the frames or these divisions that I have already, and maybe this, this, and this, and I say, well, for this apply this honeycomb, the new one. Yeah, and then let's click OK and see how it goes. Okay, so now we have this shape. Yeah, but let's say, and you can see now the frame, whatever we applied, but I want to go through also the frames, these profiles that we have. Yeah, so let's say if I go to the profile manager and then look for the cap, let's say the cap that we have created. Yeah, I go to edit. So this is the standard profile manager environment. Basically, you will have always this 0 point. That will be that everything you draw on, it's exactly actually this location. Now, what I recommend in the future when you create one, never start from a scratch. Use one in the library, duplicate, and you can use all these guidelines for you, so you don't have to start. I think to be way easier. So anyways, let's say we will simplify this, or we'll change something in it. Let's say, I don't know, let's combine these points here. And let's say we will make this, whatever, yeah. So now based on that, I'll save it. And then let's go back to 3D. And now you can see in 3D that part is updated. And we have these caps updated in the model and so on. Okay. One more thing just before we go to move on to the next one. And again, I remind you, if you have questions while we're doing something, please raise your hands and I'll stop and go through it. Sloping angle as in the oh, it's a crossing based on actually the. In this case, I would do it actually. I would rather do it actually in the settings here. So I will just adjust this distance, and that will adjust it. But it is actually possible to do it in 3D. But I think it makes more sense to something. You can because you have, but then you have to adjust it in the pattern. So you will need to spot the pattern where it is, and then adjust whatever you have in the pattern, and that actually will be repeated. Another thing, actually, since you mentioned this graphical part, I think another thing that I want to remind that still is there. You know, the features that we had earlier in terms of adjusting the boundaries and so on are. If I want to work with this, I don't know, let's say I want this to be curved or something. Now, obviously, there is no, by the way, there is no curved panels or curved frames, but it will break it into panels where you have curvatures. And let's say I want to. Okay, let's see where to pick it from. And obviously here, by the way, you can use the same methods of realigning. If you're familiar with this, I can carry on. If not, I can show you. You can still realign them, all the patterns, but I just want to show you that you can still do all the things that you use. I mean, it's just adding into it is not limiting anything that basically you're doing today. So we can maybe let's turn off these. Look at the scheme. Turn off the pattern. So, I mean, whatever shapes that you want to apply to a curve, you can apply it, yeah? All the things that we had earlier is still applicable here. So that is one thing. So that's mainly about actually the patterns, the crossing frames and the frame types that we can include. Also, another feature that we had and we still have is that the fact that we can rotate the patterns. So this is basically a very simple pattern that is just horizontal. So if I set it back to 90, this is all what we have is just a cylinder with lines running in. Yeah, but we can always rotate a pattern. So we can look at the pattern, rotate it. So let's say I'll rotate it by 45. And that's rotating the pattern totally. Yeah, so we can also, I think you can use it for these kind of things. We will go through corner frames. Again, I think I mentioned that earlier, there's new types that were introduced, and that will apply to the corner frames by default. So it will recognize corner frame and apply to it. Let's see maybe some of them. One thing good to know about, if you are drawing a curtain wall, let's say, continuous curtain wall. Sorry. And when you close it, it will not recognize the last corner. So in that case, the only thing is you have to do is, instead of starting from a corner, basically just start from another point and then delete the duplicate corner, the duplicate frame. So here you will have a duplicate frame, just delete it and you're still fine. But it's just, I mean, just to know that if you're closing at the same point, it will not recognize it as a corner. Going through these, I think I showed that earlier, that basically when these frames or corner frames will adjust to the angle, will adjust to the size and so on, and they are something that we can control in the frame. So it'll be in the corner frame where we have the types, we have all the details that we want. I'll show you maybe one of the new types with the panel. So this is a building where there's none actually for now. So if I go here, let's say this is a cut in it, and let's say I'll select it and I'll go to edit. And in frames, I want the corner, because now the corner frame is set to invisible. And instead of that, we want the, maybe we go with this, the double frame with panel actually. And once I select it, I have a nice view of what is happening here. And I can start actually working on the settings. So I can change the type of the frames, the type of the caps, the panel actually itself. So I can change that, and let's say I want the distance to be, I don't know, let's say 200. So have a bigger distance. You can control the, the materials, the coating if you want coating on panels, if it's just insulation. And you can also maybe control the material. So let's say the coating material, I'll apply something different. Let's say black paint or something. Or, I don't know. Okay, let's just pick anything for now, iron. And okay, so based on that, it will apply actually that frame based on whatever we have selected. And again, it reads the angle, it reads, and so on. So I think it's good for adding more details to your curtain walls. I will again check again if there's any questions so far. It doesn't for the file in general, but definitely for example, something like 3D, and I will cover that actually in a second. I'll show you the difference, how you can switch them on and off when you're working on things, and how you can control that. It doesn't affect the file in general. I mean, the fact that you add this will not affect the file, but for example, having all of these and a lot of these in 3D and opening that 3D might affect it, and that's why you have options where we can actually reduce that just in 3D, so it doesn't affect. And there's another thing actually in this version, you might have noticed it if you have installed already. The 3D, when you're moving, you might start having missing elements. Missing, it's not missing actually, but missing elements. That's actually an optimization that you can control to help you not slowing down the performance. Okay, so basically what I was referring to, I don't have it here. I don't have a file heavy enough to show you now, but basically in the OpenGL engine, there's this small icon. If you click on it, you will have this option that actually customizing the feedback speed based on the performance of your computer. So basically, if I have a higher number of frames, it means that I want a smoother experience, experience in 3D. And the smoother it is, it will start hiding objects that are further or that based on sort of importance to the project to keep you on the same speed. But maybe you have a big presentation and you're fine if the frame rate drops a bit. You can turn it off, or you can just say, yeah, I don't care about frame rate and so on. So also there is this optimization for 3D. So even with the resources that you have, you can still have a good experience working in 3D. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
In the last, before the break, you were showing a leafy pattern, right?
Yeah.
For these details, okay, fine, these are rectangular details will be different. What about the details of that leafy pattern? How did it develop
It will read. Imagine you're drawing it with beams. Imagine that now. For step away from the curtain wall, and imagine you're doing it with beams. The same intersections with the priority where you have for classes. If you remember when I showed this X where we have priority. So let's say you want the priority for intersection for a class of the frames. You can select them. Increase, decrease.
My question was how the members will be connected, how ARCHICAD will develop those details. I have a zigzag pattern. How will ARCHICAD develop that detail of connection of those 3-4 members intersecting each other?
It will. I mean, that will be on the element level. So it's always on the frame level or on the panel level. So frame, think of it again, beams. How will the beam intersect?
I understand. For example, I have to give this drawing to my subcontractor for fabrication. He'll ask me what is the detail of a certain corner or a certain element.
Right.
How will I convey that?
Okay, for a corner. Okay, I'll show you part of what you can do here. But mainly, again, remember that you can customize these frames, which means if you have a specific connection and this is not one of the typical ones, and you have this frame for this angle or for this connection should have a different type, you can always draw that as in your profile manager and apply it to that specific corner. So that is not stopping you from having this. But I mean, in general, think that how ARCHICAD will resolve these things as if they were beams. You're drawing, not exactly, but like as if they were beams. You're drawing with beams, how will beams intersect? So in your cases, you might prioritize one over the other in intersection, or adjust a part of that connection as a beam, like as a different type of connection. You can also do exactly the same. To be honest, I think that would be a very rare thing. It's not like thing that you will face every time. It will be exactly what you expect from. I mean, this curtain wall manufacturer usually asks you when the things are not the standard ones, and that's, I think, pretty much the case would be here. So when it's not a standard, where you usually provide these additional details, is where actually you will be creating these kind of special frames, or where you pay attention to the connections. But otherwise, I think it's not an everyday occurrence. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, we move on. Okay. So regarding the presentation in 2D, now we have two things to control in curtain wall. So we're talking about 2D. If I go to settings, now first of all, sorry, these three are exactly the same curtain wall. It's just the, sorry, I just need to get water. Yeah, all right. Thank you very much. I hope you win this helmet and you don't take it. All right, cheers.
For the tiling, is there a link on YouTube where I can see?
It's actually part of the template. You can look it up, yeah, and then we can customize it if you need help with it.
For these BIMs double issue, just main one person.
You need to send me the file or something to look at it. Okay. Cool. So these three curtain walls are actually the same. It's just the way that it's being presented. So I'll start with selecting one. You'll find now there's a new option. So here you see the one that says, I don't know if you can read it, it says projection mode. And here there's a small icon. If I click it, I will have this dialog basically for three elements. We have the cut elements, we have the uncut elements, and overhead. We can select symbolic or projected. For all of them, we can go with symbolic or projected. Now, basically symbolic is what we expect from a drafting. It's just a box and lines and so on, which is pretty much this, for example, while the projected ones will actually read the element, so you can see the actual details of it and so on. And you can also mix parts of them, because basically you can also mix that with yeah. First of all, I want to show you that actually the same applies to, like, whether it's slanted or it's the same thing, overhead is overhead and so on. But also, what I want to share with you is basically when you have these with the frames and so on, you can still control these elements the same way that you control basically 3D. In the model view options, we have a new dialog for the curtain wall components. So I can control, so even if I selected projected, but I want them to be, I want the frames to be simplified. I want the panels to be simplified. I don't want to see overhead. We can control that, and that will affect, I'll show you in a second, but that will affect the appearance in 2D and also in 3D. So in 3D, these are examples of the same curtain wall. It's the same one, we're just switching of the options, and you can see the differences between them. So in this example, you can see, if I go to the settings, that actually we set up everything to be quite simplified. So what we're looking at is simple, yet the windows are quite detailed, and maybe it doesn't fit with this idea of schematic. Again, the windows are something we control separately, and that's a new thing actually to help us with another task that I'll show. But the windows are actually considered with, sorry, with the doors and windows. Yeah, I was there. Oh. Yeah, so with doors and windows, you can actually see here where, how do you want them to be displayed in 3D, right? The ones that we use usually for doors and windows, we want them to be full simplified as schematic. So in this case, let's say I'll go with the schematic, and that should affect all the windows. So the windows are also schematic in this view. So this is more of a control, and we can combine this, what we can get from the symbolic ones in 2D, and we can get from the projected, and then the options that we have in model view options. It gives actually a quite powerful combination of the results that we can reach in our documentation. We will go now with the option of actually drawing a pattern. So we need to draw that freely. So let's say that's a pattern, and actually, I mean, it doesn't matter what pattern you draw, as long as, just notice, if you want it to be repetitive, that actually, you know, it's tileable, but actually it's a pattern that actually repeats itself. So let's start with that, and I can go to the example here. Basically, I have, again, a curtain, just a curtain wall that's empty, and I want to start drawing that. So I'll open an elevation, and I can use a trace reference to see the pattern, or in lines or whatever. And basically, I'll select the curtain wall and start, you know, editing it. And in edit, I'll pick the frame tool. Obviously, I can select the class that I want, or whatever I want to do, and start just drawing. Maybe it's good to pick actually a frame. So instead of this, I'll just go with a built-in frame and start drawing frames. Okay, so I'll just throw these frames here. And these sort of pinkish colors is just guidelines, nothing to worry about. But it helps if something goes wrong with the repetition, it helps actually, you can spot it. But by default, I mean, don't pay much attention to them. Yeah, so let's say we drew that pattern pretty much. And then I can turn on, you can see here, there's a new pattern option. So I can turn it on. And then once I turn it on, I will have this red box where I can actually start moving the pattern edges. And we can do this, by the way, in 3D, in 2D, it doesn't matter. So if you have, but I mean, if you have something to be referenced to in 3D, you can do that. And then basically, based on that, apply, and you have the pattern. And let's exit that. Let's go to 3D. And then you can start applying, what do you call it? You can start applying the panels if you want. So I can select this. Yeah, so I can select it and then start applying panels, and I can use favorites in panels. So I want this to be, this is blue, this is blue, that's a window, whatever we select, you know, we can apply partially and so on. Yeah, so whatever we apply, and then we can have something as random as these or repetitive as these and so on. So creating these patterns, I hope you find it easy, that you just basically draft it, repeat it, and even if an update happens at the pattern, you just get it updated. And that is the part from the very beginning we said, the usability, that even if you develop the pattern and then you want to adjust it, you can just adjust the pattern and it will get updated. Another sample, we talk about this, maybe the leaf sample that we covered earlier. So it's the same concept that we draw and so on. One thing, just to show you that when we draw this, or when we drew this here, that it is now the pattern, right? So I can still work on it here. So although I drafted it in elevation or something, but it'll generate a scheme for me where I can start working on it here and adjust whatever I want in this view. So it's pretty much the same with the leaf pattern. So even if I have created it in the, you know, in an elevation something, but it generates here. And once I have it in my view, again, as I said, one of the things, let's say you want to scale it up or down, the pattern after you drafted the whole thing, you can just simply select the pattern or select, sorry, the curtain wall, go to pattern, and just change the size. So let's say the size should be 7 meters, or even distort it. I mean, nothing's stopping you from distorting the element. It will rearrange it based on whatever you have applied. Yeah, not much, but yeah, you can see the difference between them. For a few other uses maybe of the curtain wall, this is one use. So this is actually what we're looking at, is this is a curtain wall. No pattern is used. We just basically drew frames and applied with panel that shows perforated. Yeah, so it's, I mean, we can use it also for such a thing if you want. What I want to show you here is also, this is, let's say, another curtain wall. So it's a big curtain wall, but it just has quite a few big frames and so on. But what I want to show you is, for example, connection between these two. Now, because these are connecting, we can control by default, the default option, if I select this frame here and I go to settings, the automatic option will be to cut it, you know, perpendicular to the facade. Yeah, but we can also, in this, we can go to settings and actually then ignore that and apply manual cut, and then define the cutting edges that we want to use, so we can get a proper connection in such cases. So yeah, this is just to look at it again. This is just an empty curtain wall, so no proper pattern applied. It's just basically frames and then panels in between and empty panels. Yeah, so maybe this is more about actually just, you know, ideas of what you can utilize it for. We will talk now about annotation of curtain walls and creating labels and so on. Starting 21, we had an option to annotate components. So even in Stair, we were able to annotate, I don't know, threads or each. So it's the same concept now that we can apply here. So if I pick, let's say, the annotation tool, and I'll use a normal auto text that actually describes. You're familiar with auto text in labels or not? Who is not familiar? Just raise hands. Okay. So just in general, as a general concept, we can pick any regular text annotation, yeah, and we can just open the text, and instead of whatever we have, we can delete and start using auto text, which reads directly from the element. So if I'm using an auto text to describe, I don't know, the frames, the whatever element that I can think of, I can actually start extracting auto text from those elements. So it's pretty much like a smart one without the coding or anything. You can just use auto text in it. So that is the same concept. So for example, this text reads specifically the frame class and some details about the frame. So if I apply this to a frame, I just have to place it here, and when I hit tab, you see it's switching between the full curtain wall and this frame. So now it reads the information of the frame. Yeah, so I can do it, let's say again here. You see with tab, it highlights the curtain wall or the sub element, and it shows whatever information that I had. And again, the same thing, let's say if I prepared another one for the panels, let's say if you read, maybe that's a bit, it will read what is it, and whatever kind of information. Like here we've listed areas of it, but we can list any kind of information that is related to the panel. It's pretty much the same concept.
I want to do, so I want to do that way, but I want to put a hexagonal, like the standard notations for windows and doors, universal, whatever, diamond or the hex.
Right.
Except all that window. So for me, that's a window, and everything else is a curtain wall.
Right.
I want to do it. So you do that, like, can I annotate that window so there's a little hexagon saying
Yeah.
WT on the
Yeah, sure. Because that is actually part of this, of the what do you call it, of the proper of the annotation. So basically, unfortunately, I don't have the full library because that's actually. But basically, you can assign this, and I'll show you how you apply it automatically once you do that. So it's not one by one, but yeah, definitely can. And actually, in this version, you can also, which was a bit of a hassle in the earlier version, if you didn't want that hexagon, you wanted a different shape for a title, you needed to know some GDL. With this version, actually, you can just draw it and save it as a label, and it will be available.
Like we're like, I'm trying to like draw like levels. I want like just like something like one of the triangle. All happens the crosshair.
No, actually, that if I recall, that's the inquiry for the levels, the default ones. No, that's the default levels. That's true. That still needs, because that is not a label. That's actually embedded in the code. You can do it. It's actually not a complicated thing. And actually, we communicated. We said, if you want it, just send me a feedback and we can do it. But for the labels specifically, now you can just draw it and save it as labels. So for this part where we want to annotate all of them in one go. So for example, in this case, let's say I will apply a tag or what do you call it, an annotation, but I'll just, for example, I'll just now show the element ID as text. So what I can do is I can select this, and then if I go to annotation, we have now, it used to be called, I think, label components of curtain wall, but now it says label component of selected elements because it's not limited anymore to the curtain wall. But anyways, in this case, if you read what is the element and show me what components do I have, and I select what elements do I want it to be annotated. In this case, I'm just showing, let's say, so show me the IDs. But in that case, if I want the tag just for the windows, then I will program that to have actually that hexagonal. And when I applied this, I'll just select the windows for that panel or for that shape or whatever. Here I can just go with windows. It'll apply to windows and then run it again. And again, just to remind you that these tags are linked to the elements. So changes in the elements, those will also be changed. The interactive schedules that we can actually schedule all the components, basically all the bits that we're using could be in a schedule. So in this case, it just shows maybe some of the panels, what are information and so on. But I think the important part is we can now also schedule the windows in the window schedule. So not only with the curtain wall. You just need to consider the classification of that. So in the curtain wall, we just need to be sure that the classification of the window that we're using is actually a window, is not a curtain wall panel, for example. And then we would be able to schedule it with a normal window schedule. Yeah. So it still says, well, maybe you can give it a name that you can recognize it that's part of curtain wall, but actually you can schedule them in the window, in your standard window schedule. The performance part, one thing to consider that in this case, for example, although it looks to us as one continuous frame, but since we have actually connections to it, it doesn't treat it as one frame, it's actually pieces. So that will add obviously to the polygons of what we're working on. So try to avoid unnecessary grid. So if the grid does not exist and has no use, remove it, because it will just add polygons to your pattern. And in terms of performance, the part that I displayed earlier, I think, where we can control what elements display in 3D, you can see the same curtain wall. The full one has around 25,000 polygons. The simplified ones is around 4,000. It's 15% actually dropping down. And that is not affecting the design or documentation. It's just while you're working, you can just switch those if you want to, to have a better experience, let's say, when you're working. Yeah, those, I think we've gone through these. I think that's actually one thing about moving the curtain walls from 21 to 22. If you open a 21 file in 22, it should be fine. The only thing is you will not have, like, let's say, the new smart options of frames will not be mapped to your existing one. It'll still show as it is, but if you want to correct that, you need to apply those. So, for example, corner frames to it or something, you need to apply it manually. It's not a big thing because you can use find and select, but I mean, it's not done automatically, but it will display as it is. So you will not be missing anything in that. It will display properly, but it wouldn't have all the options or classes have by default. So you need to adjust them. That's pretty much it for the first part of this going into details. We will have a short break, and then we will come to continue with the profiles and the expressions. Before we go to the break is short, you just take maybe 15 minutes. But before we go, do you have any questions regarding curtain walls? Because I don't think we're going back to curtain walls again. No, we're good. All right, so let's have maybe a 15 minutes break. So let's say by 25 to 25, we're back. Yeah, thanks.
When you make the code schedule, it shows me only 3D, but when I try to find like 2D, like the windows, windows have to be, I find it for curtain wall only plan view.
For curtain wall, yes, because curtain wall is not that. Even the plan view is the pattern. It doesn't show you the curtain wall.
It means if I need to apply and I need a separate view, like the section.
That's a proper, proper view. Yeah. But what I was showing is actually that now you can schedule, if you want, the windows and doors within the curtain wall with the schedule that you're using for windows or doors. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks. Cheers.
The next workshop will be 4 time. That's good.
Mr. Radek, how did you find it so far?
Yeah. Which version you were still working on?
You know your requirements, I know. But are you still doing interior mostly, or you're still your interior? Okay. Okay.
I didn't know which one is your problem. Maybe I'm not. Well, yeah. Well, the thing is, it's good. I mean, for all power plants, they have new covers. What we do with them is actually they go through the self-training material. It's like around 6 10 hours. And once they finish it, then we do some sort of workshop with it. But to be honest, all the online material will be for the new version. I know maybe I can find something for 17, but like it would be a bit hard for them to follow because so that's one thing. But I mean, for all the times when someone comes to you, you actually go with this, and then we do either a workshop or we actually like workshop on height. So it's all we're not sure how to mold it or we do that, and then we just actually provide them with support. So WhatsApp or whatever, Skype or so that's. So it could be.
Sorry, I just want to let you know this. Yesterday, I made sure IT is on call all for your entire event, just in case. And I requested the other IT guys. Yeah, just so you know, but feel free. The team knows. I told them to keep checking, but I want to make sure. So okay. Yeah, slow no problem. Thank you.
So like, no, I think it's done. At that time we didn't have because the some licenses were used recently. Because now we have an option. You don't want to use bundles, so you just want to cool. Yeah, sure. The dongles. I think it's still the dongles actually, but they're maybe just on the server. So you're not able to connect that with things now? It wasn't reading the license. Maybe it's just directing it to the server. So it's just that in the code meter, you just say, look, folks, the license there. That's because that's the thing. You have perpetual licenses. So for upgrade, this should work. Yeah. I mean, unless if it's damaged physically or something. Let's check that. I hope it's not because not on SSA's replacing is actually big. Let's hope not. Let's check them first. Let's look at it. See whenever you have time, then that's fine. But check it. Check what is the issue. Because it might be. I really don't think it's not, but could be. And then, but what I'm guessing is more is actually just pointing the new machines to the server. You just say like read the license. So that's what I'm guessing. So we can just look at that. That is probably that's not it. And do you think
Okay, So we'll start with the last part of this. So you can then go home and enjoy whatever is left from your weekend. So we will talk now about the new profile, the parametric profiles, and the options that we have in them. The main idea is that we will have these ability in profiles to be able to, to change the dimensions and so on without actually creating new profiles. For example, this is where we have, let's say, I don't know, a core, steel core, and maybe we have fire protection. And we need to extend these differently in each connection. So that's one example. Well, let's say I want this to be here and this to be here, and maybe no fire protection from this side, while let's say at the corner, it's a different story. So I want these two, you see, and nothing from these two corners, let's say, because the wall, protecting against fire, while this has it from two sides, while not here. Yeah. So these things earlier, if we wanted to do them with profiles, it will require us to create different profiles. Not the case anymore. And we will go through the details of actually how we do that and so on. The availability of this is in for wall tools, beams, and columns. As we've seen also, the profile itself, profile manager, is extended to frames and handrails and so on, but obviously without the parametric part there. So there we can just use it, but not all the flexibility, but we can just assign it to those elements. The differences between what we had earlier and what we have today also is, in 21, let's say we were able to stretch a profile. So let's say we can, if you remember, we were able to assign a stretch zone that actually just stretch and doesn't affect the other part. So that might work for this, but something like if we're going the other way, it's a bit hard to do. While actually in 21, we can control pretty much every edge, or whatever we decide to control, I mean. But here, as an example, every edge separately, and that is still the same, the same profile that whatever we decide to do is reflected in 2D, 3D, and so on. We will start by seeing how does that work. So we'll start with a simple beam, like this beam here, for example. And let's say we want to go to editing this beam. Yeah. Now, we still have the old stretching zones. We still have them, so we can use them, and it's helpful because we can use them for the core of elements. Maybe you will see that in a minute after, maybe in walls, we can assign it to a core or something, so we can assign that. But the important part is we can start by adding the modifiers. So to add a modifier, you will see this new button here, and basically you just click it, and it will ask you for a name for this modifier that you want to offset, the offset modifier. Now, again, if you want consistency in your file, it is good to use the same names in the common profile. So even if it's different design, but maybe you use the same names. And that's where we have this list. Now, obviously, this is a bit of a large list. The default doesn't come with this, but this is because for this file, it has a lot of profiles. But it's good to pick from these. So let's say if I want to, let's say the web thickness of that. So I can just type in web thickness and it will be highlighted that it already exists, so I can use it directly. So that is good because it's universal across the frames. So imagine that would be very easy for you to handle in schedules, that web thickness means the web thickness regardless of what you use. So that's a good thing, but that doesn't mean you cannot create your own. You can just create on the fly. So let's say I'll go with that. So web thickness. Now, the moment I create one, if you see, all the edges are highlighted, which means all of these edges are free to be associated with this modifier. So I'll start by clicking here as this small icon, and then I'll start selecting them. So for example, we have two types mainly. We will talk about the types, but roughly two types of, or three types of connections. Either we link two edges together, so whether it's in the same direction or different direction, but edges together, or point with an edge, like a node of an element, or just a random fixed point with an edge. We'll go through it, but for now, we'll just select these two edges, yeah, because I know the web thickness, I want it to be controlled by both, yeah. So I selected these, and once I placed it, you see these small arrows, it actually identifies the direction of the edge movement. So now they're both are going, it will measure from 20, 30, which means out, 40, out, and so on. So that actually controls it. So that is one. And let's say we want, let's say we want height, maybe, or we can use the height. It's fine. Let's go with the flanges. Actually, let's go with the flange thickness. So I'll create, let's say, one. I'll call it the top flange thickness. Yeah. And I'll create another one. And you can see now, for example, once I click, it highlights only the edges that are not associated. So it tells me which ones that are free. Let's say I'll create another one. I'll call it bottom flange thickness. Yeah. So let's start with the bottom. So I'll click here, and sorry, I'll click here. And let's say in case of bottom, I don't want both to move. Because I want it to measure from here. So I'll just go with a node in this case, not an edge. So node and edge. Yeah. So I'll just click here, and then I'll pick this edge, and I place it. Which means when I move this or add it, not both are moving. This is fixed. This is only moving. Yeah. But to me, I want also this to be affected, this edge. So I can always click on this small plus and add a new edge. And remember, when I add a new edge, what is the direction of movement? So here. So now I can, if I want to run a quick check, I can always select from the list. So if I want to check which elements are connected to the bottom flange thickness, let's say, I click on it and it shows me the edges highlighted and the point associated with it. Yeah. Let's say the top flange. So I'll just go here. And in this case, because this is slanted, I don't want to measure it from here. So basically, I'll pick two nodes, so point, and then edge, which means consider this dimension, but move this edge. Yeah, so this is the dimension I'm reading, but move this edge as it is. Yeah, and again, I want to add another edge to it, so I'll just click here, select, and click. Yeah, so now basically, and by the way, if I have, let's create a new one, whatever. When I create that, if it's not associated with anything, it will show that it's not associated. And when I save, it will give me a notification saying that you have created something that is not associated. It will be deleted. Yeah, so it will delete anything that you didn't utilize in in your profile. So let's say based on these, I'll just say let's say save or apply. It doesn't matter, and then go back to the view. And now you can see now I have these blue edges. These blue edges show the edges that are actually dynamic or it has modifiers. And basically, once I click on it, you'll see now I have this small icon here that allows me to work with modifiers. And then I can start working on them. I can enter the measurement. I can set it to 0. So here, for example, let's say I want to turn it into some sort of a T shape. I can turn it to that shape, and that's pretty much it. Yeah. So that is actually how we control or we create these modifiers and link them. Is it okay? Is it? I mean, it's a brand new thing, but I think it's quite easy to pick also once you start working on it. As I mentioned, we have mainly 3 options. Edge to node, which is basically a moving node that may be from another element linked to an edge, like what we had here, if you remember the lower part. what we had here, right? So it was reading from this point to this edge. So I am moving, whatever I move, it reads from the point, yeah? And then we had an option that is edge to edge, so two edges moving together, like the web thickness. And then we have, you can link it to a fixed point or a fixed location. So it's not related to the element, it's just fixed point you measure from it. So you can say, I don't know, the bottom of, to be honest, I didn't utilize this yet. I couldn't find a reasonable use of it, but you have that. You can link it not to an element, just to a measurement, 5 centimeters from something or so on. This applies also to walls, as mentioned earlier. So this is one of these profiles, and let's open maybe a section. Let's see how we can add this here also. So let's open the this here, and let's say we want to add for the tiling height, we want to add a modifier that allows me to change the tiling height. It would be good, let's say in this case, that actually I have the stretch modifiers linked to the core of the wall. Yeah, so that means if I apply the stretch horizontally, it will stretch the core. Yeah, correct, the block part of it. And let's add that we want a modifier, and we'll call it tiling height, let's say. And again, let's click OK. And for example, here, what I want is this edge, basically. But, and that's, I think, is a good one to notice. So I want to link it to a point, yeah? But here, this point is shared between two fills, the block fill and some of the plaster. And obviously, I want it to be linked with the block because I might change the plaster or remove the plaster or so on. I can use the tab to select. So in this case, I want to be linked to the edge of the block. So click here, and that's pretty much it. So now I have tiling height. So let's say save or apply. And now in the section, I have here this as a modifier that I can actually, move. Or remember that also these are always available as modifiers. And now, whether it's here or in going in settings, you will have the modifier as a new tab where you can actually enter them or modify them and so on. One thing though, unfortunately, it's not. I cannot display it now. I don't know when I'm connecting to the projector, it doesn't show, but you will be able to see it at home. When I place, you see here now, this thickness actually reads the nominal thickness, which means if I go back here, you see here there's nominal width and there is a total width. Yeah. So when you, again, I think it's a display thing with the projector, that if you go here and just hover your mouse over this, you will be able to read both. So you know what is actually the nominal. So you know what is the, let's say, block part, and you know what is the total in one go. You don't need to. So you can see that on your computers when you're back. So that is one. Another example is this. For example, this is two sort of parametric of these profiles. So let's say in this foundations, we can change, the foundation size, depth, and so on. And that's a normal slab. And then let's open a section. Maybe it'll be easier in section. And let's say here I have selected the core in this case, which is what we had the stretch, the nominal width that we're talking about. And let's say we will push it out a bit. So let's say here, but I want these because these are parametric now, so I want them to be back here. So I can, I can wrap it around these nicely, and I can do more. So for example, this has some of the wooden part that actually, let's say, moves. So if I want this wooden part or this corniche to be on a specific height, I can utilize that. Or maybe I have even a top corniche that I want to change the size. I mean, this is a bit of an extreme example, but just to show, what you can do with these tools. And if I look at it, so for example, these walls are the same one with the insulation, without insulation, different heights of this wooden part, and so on. So you can have all these combinations. And still, when you're listing them, it will only list the actual skins that are available. It will not list the skins that we set to 0 or something. So you will have a very clear quantities or schedules and so on. To just understand where are we using these parameters, because they're part of the object or part of, sorry, the profile of this object, we can do a lot of it. So we can schedule it as I have displayed. We can use graphical overrides on it. So I can say, you know, highlight the ones with a specific value of one of the modifiers with a specific color. And I can use also the label tool on it to read the values of whatever we use in that. And also that is exported with the same information via IFC if I want to exchange that with other platforms. And also it goes as part of the favorites. But just remember that was a bit changed in 21, that now copying and pasting or injecting the attributes, something we can control. So if we want to inject specific attributes, not everything, we want, let's say we have 2 doors and we want to copy just the size but not the type, or we want to copy inject attributes of walls and I don't want to change the material, I just want the thickness or layer or something. That's something that we can control now in the injection, because we can actually set the transfer settings and give it a name. So in each one we can, that was actually available in 21 already, but so I can give it a name of a combination of the elements to be. So for example, in this case, for dimensions, I want the layer, other settings for walls. Let's say walls is more complicated. So we can tick what elements or what kind of attributes do we want to copy between elements, and then save them as a favorite. So having said that, it's the same concept for the what do you call that? For the modifiers. Now we will find the modifiers as part of, let's say, let's pick a beam. Here, for example, you can see you can select that to be copied or not. So when we're injecting, you can determine if you want actually to also copy the same, all the values of the modifiers or not. Yeah, so that's also something to consider, even in favorites, because favorites is using one of these, whatever we have selected. And again, when we are scheduling that, each one will be scheduled with the modifier. So these are actually modifiers that we've added to those profiles. So all of these will be scheduled so we can get the right information about it and all of that. And also we can use graphical override on this. So in this case, we have a graphical override that basically reads that if the modifier, the width thickness, is less than 15, highlighted in red. So these, I'm guessing, are less than 15. And if I change that, let's say if I make this thicker, it will go back to normal. If I make this, you know, thinner, because that's an active view, yeah? So it will go back to red. So that's good also for me to isolate, run visual checks, and so on. And the last thing is the labels. That again, if I have a label reading these values, that it will actually show me the actual values of these elements. So even if I change, you know, that, for example, the web thickness will be changed and so on. So they're all linked. That's quite what I wanted to cover about the profiles before moving to expressions. So I know, do you have any questions about the profiles before we move to using expressions? Yes.
I can have these individual choice, the variations that are there in a single profile. Can I have them be named in any way so that the contractor knows which one?
Yeah, because that's the ID. So that's where you add the ID to them. So you can use, then you can use even the automatic, this ID manager, where you can say by these, give them combine them. If they're matching these attributes, combine them and give them one name, or if they're not. So that would be the ID actually of them. But the complex profile, the profile is still the same. The name of the profile is still the same, but you can give them different names, each one as an IDs. Yeah. Anything else, or should we move on to expressions? All right. Expressions. Again, it might sound a bit overwhelming at the beginning. It was to me, but I think after a while, and not only that, after a while you get used to it and you find how powerful it is, but also the template comes with samples that actually helps you wrapping your mind around it. But in general, if you are familiar with that in spreadsheets, you should be fine here. I wasn't, so it was a bit of a journey for me to find out. But basically, what we're looking at when we are creating an expression, this is a bit of complicated expression, obviously, but an expression is a combination of functions, parameters or properties, numbers, and text, pretty much. Yeah. So we will see now how we can put these together to reach a result of whatever we're looking for, to customize a field that you're looking at, and so on. The first example that we will run is calculating, I think we showed that earlier, the window rate per space, per room, how we can run that. So basically what we're looking at, it's very simple calculation if you look at it, that we want per zone, we want the rate of actually the result of dividing the window surface to the floor surface of that space. Yeah, it's quite simple. So what we know already as a property in ARCHICAD, we have the window surface area because we can extract that per zone, and we have the space floor plan area because also we can extract. We just have to create this as a property. Yeah. So how to do that is basically that is the concept that we need to. Well, we create a property. We call it window rate. In properties, we have groups, so we can put it in any group. It doesn't matter. I mean, here's just the name. The data type of it is interesting because now I'll show you what our data types. But the data type of this is a number. It's not a dimension. It's not a length. It's not a text. It's a number. And the expression, which means the calculation that we need to run, is basically window surface area divided by calculator. So if you want to create that, we can go to Property Manager here. And let's say we're looking at this, we want to create that. So I'll just create a new property that's similar to what we were doing earlier. And I will put it in the calculation group. Again, that's just grouping. Yeah? It has nothing to do with the function itself. It's just for us to. So in the calculation, and we will call it window rate. Yeah. So we've created one in window rate. And now if I go to the data type, the data type, what we have is a string, which is string basically is text. Yeah, it's just text that you can type. So you say this data type is just text, show me text, is not numbers. And then we have number, which is number basically, and integer. And then we have these 4 new types, which are mainly measurable items. So length, area, volume, and angle. So I can tell ARCHICAD that consider this as a length, so it adjusts to the scale that you're using, to the dimensions, and so on. But for now, we just go with a simple one. Just go with number. And now what we're looking at is an expression, right? We want to write the expression. Now that's where we do this calculation. So we want basically window surface area divided by calculated area. Now we know that these are properties from zones. So it's very easy. We open, these are parameters from zones. So I can just click here. And here we have a list of all the elements, all the parameters. So let's say I want in zone. I want in zone the window surface area. And by the way, you can always search here. So if you're not sure where it is, you can type in. But for now, we will go through it. And we say for zone, we will look for the window surface area. So I know we place this here. And then I want it to be divided. Divided are here. We can use the operators here, or we can use shortcut. But again, let's say operators, and I'll pick divide, or again, simple shortcut. You just click and divide, and then calculated area, which is again a parameter of the zone. So here we have calculated area. Yeah. So basically now I have created this new property. The only one thing left that I need to add it to a classification. So in this case, let's say I'll add it to all spaces. You know, all spaces. So all zones will be able to benefit from this property. I decide on that because in some cases it doesn't make sense to link it to something. Let's say in this case that is not something you want to display with walls. It doesn't make sense. Yeah? So you just click here, and that's pretty much it. So now if I say OK, and then open the schedule. So in the schedule so far, what I have is we have zone name, calculate area, window, surface area. Those are that you can extract them directly. And now we will just add. Sorry, we will just add a new field from the properties. We put it, I think, in calculations, and that is our window rate. I think. Oh, I didn't add. Sorry. Window rate. And here we go. We have it now per window. Yeah. So basically, it's running these divisions and so on. And because these are done on an element level, we didn't do it in the schedule, which means we can display them back on the element. So for example, if I want the zones to display that in part of their zone stamp, I can select them. And let's say go to settings and go to the settings, and I can select from the attributes that I have, let's say the window rate or properties that I have, and now it will display that per zone. Yeah, so it will display the calculation that we did because it is part of the element. These are embedded in the element as properties. Yeah, so that's an example of how it works. I'll show a couple of more examples. But as I told you, it might feel a bit overwhelming the first time, but I really think it's a very, very powerful one once you can start finding it. The second example that we will do is we will try to calculate. Let's say that we have this building, and we have these block walls, and we want to calculate basically how many pallets of bricks basically we want to bring in. So not only bricks, we'll take it one step ahead, that how many pallets of these bricks. In general, just a general look at it, basically what we will do is we will start from the smallest unit, which is the brick. So we will have the volume of a brick. And then we will make ARCHICAD calculate every wall, how many bricks would it require. And then I'll put an input that every pallet or every shipment or whatever contains so and so bricks, and now calculate this whole thing for me. So we'll go through it step by step. So the first one is we want to calculate how many bricks per wall. Yeah. So basically, again, we want to create a new property that says number of bricks in wall. That is the net volume in this case, which is the wall volume without the openings, divided by the volume of a single brick. Yeah. Now this is a value, but this is not a value by default. There is no such a thing. Yeah. So we need to create this property first, which is the unit brick volume. And we can add to this. So we can consider, if you want, for example, you can consider 5% wastage. You can consider additional thickness for the mortar. You can take all those in consideration when you're doing it. So let's say the first one is actually we will create a new property that calculates the volume per brick. Yeah. Now obviously we can put a number, but I'm giving this with dimensions to have one step ahead, or even to automate that. You might have a list of different types of bricks and you want to see with each one. But now we'll just go with a simple one where we calculate a volume of that. So we will go again to Property Manager. And following these, we will create, actually we have it already created in input values, but it's not the expression. So we have a unit already that says unit brick volume. We have property already, sorry, unit brick volume. And it says the data type is volume because we want ARCHICAD to understand that it's a volume. And then we will go with the expression. And the expression here is very, very simple because it's just 75 by 100, so it's very simple. So I'll just start typing, but we need to enter a unit here. So I need to say it's 75 what? Because we're talking volume, yeah? So 75, in this case, millimeters. I can type mm, or I can always find the units here. So let's say if I want for length, I want millimeters, and then times, let's say 130 again, millimeter. And by the way, as you can see below, there's always a line checking what we're working on. So now it's a volume, and the fact that what we have is just 2 dimensions, so it's not really a volume. So it tells you that is not matching the data type that you had. So you always have something as a code checking while you're working. So let's say times 260 again millimeters. Yeah. So now you see it's actually fine. There's no alert. So we've done the first step. Yeah. So that's okay. Now we want to do the other one, which now we want to calculate the bricks per wall. Yeah, bricks per wall. And in this case, again, what we're looking is the net volume of the wall divided by the volume of the brick. However, we want to round that number down. So we want full numbers because you're not going to have and a half or so we want to round it down. So we'll use round down. Otherwise, if we went with just net volume divided, we will have the numbers, with fractions, let's say. So in this case, sorry, one more thing that we need to check when we created this. I'm not sure if we checked the classification that is linked to it. Oh, it's already linked. Okay, fine. So let's go with this. And again, we would go property manager, and we want one that is called bricks in walls. It's already created. And the good thing here is, again, let's say if I want, I'm not sure where is this round up. We can just start by typing, and I can find round up here. And when I type it, it gives me again a placeholder to tell what kind of input it expects from me. So for example, for this number is actually the logic that you're applying, the number that needs to be rounded up. So we will put the logic here. So it will be net volume. So that's a generic or general parameter that we can use. And then we divide it by the property that we've created minutes ago when we created the property to calculate the volume of the bricks. Yeah? So here an input value, unit brick volume, and then we just enter where we're rounding up to what, we're rounding up 0, so it doesn't have decimals. And here we go, we have it by wall. Okay, fine. Now, the one more input that we need to add, or sorry, this is actually a calculation that we want to know, fine, now we've calculated the number of the bricks in a wall. We want to know, we want to divide it by the number of bricks per pallet, so I know how many pallets should I order, right? But first, I need to create an input that tells ARCHICAD how many bricks in a pallet. So that's again an input, so I'll create that. So property manager again, and we create, and again, this is obviously this is a very boring thing to see being created, but you will have it in the template. So you can start, instead of starting from scratch, you can just sort of optimize what you've got. So here, let's say this is the bricks on pallet. And in this case, we don't have a calculation, we just want the number. Yeah, so I can just go with value and say, for example, here what we have is 500. So the value is 500. So it's not a calculation because we're just saying there is 500 per pallet. There's nothing to be calculated. So I've created that. And the last calculation, which is this, yeah, if I look at it here, basically we are dividing the bricks per wall, the bricks that we have in a wall, divided by bricks on pallet, so we can get the number. So here we go. I think we have already in calculations. So number of pallets is basically, we're looking at the same thing, number, and then expression, and then we go to the properties and we pick bricks per wall or bricks in wall. Yeah, and then we divide it by what we created in input, which is bricks on pallet. And that's pretty much it. And if I click OK, and I open the schedule, now I have the total number of pallets. So again, just to run through it quickly, what I have is a net volume of each element. I have give an input of the volume of a brick. Then it calculated the number of bricks per wall. Yeah, and then I told ARCHICAD that I'm expecting 500 bricks per pallet. So give me number of pallets, and then I know how many I'm supposed to order. Now, obviously, this is the same logic. You can consider pricing. You can consider, you can consider all of these elements to add to it. I know you will have many questions about it. So if you have questions of the concept or actually any of the steps, we can go through it again. Do you have anything? Is it clear just to start with, or it's not that much? Yeah. Okay. So let's run quickly through it again. The whole idea, we wanted to know how many boxes, pallets of bricks we're going to bring for this building. So first thing I need to know, how many bricks do I have to buy? Yeah. So how to calculate that? We went on a wall level, and we said find in each wall how many bricks I'm using. So that is this calculation. Yeah, per wall, how many bricks? So that is basically, well, the volume of the wall divided by the volume of a single brick. And I input maybe the volume of single brick, or in this case, I actually made a calculation of a volume. So that is done. Then the next step was actually to know how many pallets. Now we know how many bricks in general we have in the project, but we want to know how many pallets. So we just told ARCHICAD, well, per pallets I have 500. Now divide that number by this, and that's pretty much the total calculation. Yeah, correct. That is, yeah, correct. And that's why you can, in your input values, for example, you can have it more complicated. That instead, in this example, we said the volume of this is 750 times so and so. We can create another property that actually reads a drop menu of values that you have, and you just basically assign that. So it will read. It's a sort of a dynamic one that will read from your drop menu, the new type, calculates it again, and so on. You can do way more than I'm showing, but I think for a first time it's a bit, it's a bit too much to take. So I'm just going through it, but you absolutely can do that, and it will even be part of a drop menu that you say, using this type of bricks, it calculates the volume automatically, and it does the rest of calculations for you. Okay. We're not going through the next options as in details, but I just want to show you how it works, just to know how it works in general. I think I've displayed this, the idea that you can use one tag to read different information, to display different information of elements based on the element type. So you can see for a door, it shows, the door ID, maybe the floor that's in, and maybe the opening orientation. For a window, it just shows maybe the name and the floor it's in. For a column, it shows the core dimensions and so on. Basically, this is, again, we're not going to do that, but it shows how it works. This is a command. Concat is actually a command to add text to each other. So here, if you can see, this is a text, and it's an addition of different text. So there's this part as a text, there's this part as text, this is the text, and so on. So this is actually how it works. Again, we're not going through it now, but you can see it actually combining the element ID with this signal as a text, then the home floor of this ID, of this element, and then if it's a door, use the orientation. So if it's a window, which is in this case, nothing, display nothing, and so on. Yeah. We're not going through this a lot because, again, those are actually something you find in the template, and it's good when you start looking at it. One thing, though, I want to show you, by the way, sorry, I think I forgot to open that. In the reference guide, because you might not be familiar that much with the properties that, or the parameters that are already available. think the page has changed. Okay, here. In 1676, if you want to look at it, it's actually, if you open that, you will have the parameters of each element described. What is it and what does it do? So when you want to do such calculations, whether in schedules or on this, you will see it per element. So here you can tell the general ones or per element. So if you want, let's say we're working with walls, you can see what kind of information we can extract, and you can see it here, yeah? And also the same goes to the new, so all of these are actually very visual and you can use, and the same goes for the functions. So if you are not sure of the use of the functions or something, you can go with any of the functions and it'll explain how it works. It'll give you an example, and you know, so it's a good thing to look at it, especially if you're if you're not very familiar with it. And actually, another thing that, again, unfortunately not showing on the projector, but it's the same thing. You can see an example. If I create a classification, usually here, if I'm creating a new expression, if I hover over any of these, you will see a pop-up explaining, giving you an example and what does it do. You're not able to see it here for this connection issue, but actually it shows that you know, what is it? You just place your mouse cursor over the function that you want to use, and it'll give you an example of it, what is it used for, and then a sample and so on. I think we are okay. One good example also, maybe we just run it quickly. It's if we want to calculate occupancy. Let's say we have, you know, a building, and we want to check the occupancy requirement versus the regulation. The regulation says, you know, in public spaces per person it is 2 meters. In office it's 1 meter, 1 square meter, and so on. And we have regulations that we want this room for 50 people. So we want to run check between these two. We're not going to do the example, but I'm just going to explain how it works. So we usually start with our design requirements. Yeah. So we say, oh, entrance hall, we need 50 person, or so on. So we create that, and then in our example here, we maybe even show them here, like in stamps and so on. And you know, we can create the list that says per use and how many people expect and so on. But then we have the regulations that says, you know, yes, in access spaces, you need the minimum of 1.5 meters. So yes, I want 50 people, but I'm not sure if I'm meeting then this requirements, yeah? So we can create a property based even on the type of space. Now, this is a very nested property. So it's actually search. I mean, just to explain it briefly, what it says here, it says if this zone classification is access space, so in this case, this is a public space or something, apply this value, 1.5. If it's not, move to the next if. So if it's not, try. Is it educational space? Yes. No. So this way we covered all of these uses in one property with a value for each use. That is the requirements by the government, let's say, or the requirements by the guideline. And based on that, we just run down, obviously per area, we run the calculated area divided by the property, the regulations per space, and then we can run a compliant that actually either true or false. Are we achieving that or not? Again, I think that's a bit too much, but it's a good example because it's a bit complicated to see what you can do with it. But based on this, so I have now a schedule that actually shows, let's say, the zone, the use of it, that whatever classification we use, it's a hallway, it's an office space, and so on. The one mandated by the government or by the guideline per person, the calculated area, what I actually have, and the occupants, the ones that in my design program, and actually the calculated max occupancy, what is allowed for me. And then it compares these two, and it tells me either that is actually achieved or not. Now, based on this, we can also reflect that back on the floor plan. So I can run a graphical override that tells me if it's true, display it in green. If it's false, so we're not meeting the requirement, go with red. So in this case, let's say if I change anything here, let's say this is now bigger, it becomes green. So it's good for me even while I'm designing to run these things. So we can do actually this kind of calculations and and reflect it back to ARCHICAD. I think we will just wrap up with this. That again, this kind of calculations are not done on a schedule level. That's actually, I think, quite important to know that this is done on an element level. And that's what allows us to do this kind of information. That's what allows us to extract it in a tag. That's what allows us to run an override on it. Because we are not just doing that on the schedule. We're not just running numbers and schedule. We're actually getting the values, putting it back in the elements. That's. I mean, we still have few enhancements. One of them, maybe I'll just mention them while I'm talking. One of them is now the stairs, for example, has an overhead option. So you can run an overhead check for the stairs. It actually creates a volume that you can check in your sections, in your 3D, and so on. The clash detection now has a tolerance, so you can set a tolerance in clash detections. Earlier, collision detection ARCHICAD was set to 0. So if two surfaces are touching, it will be displayed. Now we can set a tolerance to it. We have these levels, for example, even levels or tags could be related to components, as I mentioned earlier. What I show maybe in the curtain wall, that actually the tag reads the frame information, not the whole thing. We can do maybe levels with stairs, for example. If I want to place levels on each step, we can actually use it also now with the same concept per step. And yeah, there are minor things, but I think those are the major things I tried to cover today. I will take, again, if there's questions here, and then maybe I'll just read with you briefly. I think there's a few questions from the people following us online. We'll just check them. So we'll start with here. Any questions regarding anything, basically this or anything that we covered during today? Yeah, is it after a week? Okay, well, we can. Okay, yes. Absolutely, you can, because at the end of the day, it's not just a curtain wall. You can. It's a repetitive. Anything with a repetitive pattern, you can use it, and then you can classify it as something else. So you can I can use it, let's say, for tiling. Let's assume I want it for tiling. I can use it for tiling, and I can classify it as a floor, and I can schedule it with floors in terms of. So absolutely, yes, you can do a lot with it and change the classification. But it is called the curtain wall. And that's actually, I think, one of the good things in ARCHICAD, this whole flexibility that you can pick a tool, model something else. It's not very stricted in that terms. Yeah. You're welcome. Anything else? Yeah. If not, let me try to read some of these. Those were complaining when apparently we were going offline. It's on offline. That's still. Nope. The files, sharing the files. Well, I'm not sure we can share the training files here. However, if you are one of our clients, yes, drop us a line and we definitely can work on that. So if you wanted any of these files, although to be honest, I think that even if you take it, you will not use. I prefer running. If you still need help with that, we might run a workshop with you to cover that than actually giving you the file. But I mean, yes, the files are available for the clients if you wanted that. Yes, this webinar is recorded, and I will email you actually a link where you can see the whole thing. The new features in new BIMx. I think that is because we got disconnected online when we were showing BIMx. I will add that to the recording, but mainly what we have in BIMx new is the ability to use like a presentation mode that actually goes into slides of preset views, and we can run it in a loop in auto connection. And the other thing that might be interesting to show that I skipped, I think the first part, is the online BIMx. So this is actually, I'm running BIMx here in a browser. So you can actually start using BIMx. If you want to pass it to your clients, you can just run it in a browser. So you can just give them the link, and they can just go through you know, the model that you have, and they can read the information that you are providing. They can see the drawings that you have. And also the same, so they can see the drawings, zoom in, navigate, and so on. So if you don't want to use the app for whatever reason, you can go that. And also you can embed that, you can have this linked to your website. So it's not only the Graphisoft website. If you want, it's like, you know how the embedding option in YouTube, let's say, that you actually get a link and you add it to your website. It's pretty much the same. You can link that directly to your website or display it in your website. So it runs like as a window in your website. It's just an element. The other thing that I think we covered is this BIMx Lab, the new concept that actually will be able to handle any size on the devices. You can get it, I think it's already released actually on Apple Store and Google Play Store. Yeah, I think that was the issue with the BIMx. Yeah. As I said, unfortunately, we were not able to stream that online, but we will add it to the recording. I think one last thing is left to just do this draw and see who's going to protect their heads with these helmets.